For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
We are live this morning on Standing for Truth. I've got a very exciting debate today between two men who need no introduction. You guys all know Dr. Ken Hovind. He's been on here many times for interviews and debates. Also, Jim Majors as well. He's no stranger to debates. So today we're debating what's the evidence for biblical creation. I've got Nephilim Free here. I want to thank him. He's going to be moderating this debate. So I'm going to hand it over to him for just a brief introduction, and he's going to go over the format real quick. Neff, it's all yours, man.
Okay, so good morning, gentlemen. We're going to have 8-minute openings, 5-minute rebuttals, and 25-minute discussion, and 4-minute closings. So Jim's going first. They flipped a coin, and Dr. Hovind won the flip, and he decided Jim goes first. So Jim, your 8-minute opening statement. Let me start my timer. 1 second. For such a little application, it starts awfully slow. Okay, there it is. Okay, Jim, when you start speaking, 8 minutes.
Sorry, coffee first. First of all, I'd like to thank Kent for coming to this debate and discussing this very important issue. The book of Genesis, which accounts the biblical creation, it's been traditionally attributed to Moses and narrates the exodus of Israel from Egypt and is traditionally dated around 1400 BCE. The vast majority of modern scholars accept that the accounts in Genesis are not in their original form, but rather they are a later composition. In fact, the Genesis that we know today was formed as late as around 400 BC, which was BCE. My apologies, which is right after the exile of Israel. But it's important before examining these accounts of creation in Genesis chapters 1 and 2. I believe that we need to first discuss another creation myth. It's a Babylonian epic, an epic that's known by Enuma Elish. Enuma Elish means "when on high," and it's the first words of the text. I believe the text dates back to 7th century, and we have references to these gods dating back to the 18th century. The story in the Enuma Elish begins before the formation of heaven and earth. Nothing existed except what they except in their creation myth, the primeval freshwater existed, and it's personified by a god named Apsu, a male god named Apsu. There also existed a primeval saltwater deity, a saltwater ocean deity named Tiamat, a female goddess. I'll be reading in part from a translation of the Enuma Elish, and the story begins. When on high, the heaven had not been named, firm ground below had not been called by name, not but primordial Apsu, their begetter, and Mumu Tiamat, she who bore them all. Okay, so, and it goes on to say, when no gods whatever had been brought into being, uncalled by name, their destinies undetermined, then it was that the gods were formed within them. But these new creations were annoying, apparently, to these early primeval gods. The Enuma Elish says that the divine brothers banded together and that they were disturbing Tiamat as they surged back and forth. And it troubled the mood of Tiamat by their what they call the hilarity in the abode of heaven. And so Apsu opens his mouth and says to Tiamat, he says, "Their ways are verily loathsome unto me. By day I find no relief, nor repose by night. I will destroy, I will wreck their ways, that quiet may be restored. Let us have rest." So these creations are very much disturbing them, and so he has a plan to kill them. Tiamat answers him, kind of trying to counsel him, and says, "Do destroy, my father, the mutinous ways. Then you will have relief by day and rest by night." And Apsu heard this, and his face grew radiant because of the evil he planned against the gods, his sons, the sons of God. So we see here that their decision to kill their creation is due to the ruckus they were causing, for a lack of a better term. But his plan's ruined by another god named Ea, spelled E-A. It's a god, the god of earth and water, and he kills Apsu, and which totally ticks off Tiamat. So she gathers up an army and sets out to attack the gods. The gods, who were concerned for their safety, with rightly so, they appoint Marduk, who's another deity, as their leader, and he leads them into war, but only after he sets certain conditions. In the Enuma Elish, he says, "Creator of the gods, destiny of the great gods, if I indeed, as your avenger, am to vanquish Tiamat and save your lives, set up the assembly, proclaim supreme my destiny." So he wants to be notified as the supreme god. He wants to be the top dog. Up until then, he was just a city god, a god of the city. Let my word instead of you determine the fates. Unalterable shall be what I may bring into being. Neither recall nor change shall be the command of my lips. And eventually, Marduk brings down the mighty Tiamat in battle, and he stands on her carcass. Now, what's said next is very interesting. So far, you may have recognized some other parallels to the creation accounts in Genesis already, and to other creation accounts. But listen closely to this. He split her like a shellfish into two parts. Half of her he set up and sealed it as sky, pulled down the bar and posted guards. He bade them to allow not her waters to escape. So Marduk is using the clamshell shape of half of Tiamat's carcass to hold back the waters as a firmament. And the holes that were gained in battle are used as an early explanation for rainfall. They were the leaks, so to speak, in the firmament. Now the other half of Tiamat is the land, which holds down the waters which reside below. Sound familiar? Then comes the creation of the heavens and the heavenly bodies. The Enuma Elish reads, "He constructed stations for the great gods." The heavenly bodies were understood early as stations for the great gods. They determined the year by designating the zones, and he set up 3 constellations for each of the 12 months. Interesting. That's what we have today. The moon he caused to shine, the night to him entrusting. Interesting. Now, looking at Genesis, like any other myth, it was written by ancient authors from an ancient time using an ancient understanding of life, our origins, and the cosmos. In this post-exilic time, the identity of Israel was suffering. They no longer had the temple to unite the Israelites, and they were struggling to do just that, to unite their society. And we all have ways of connecting with our own society and attempting to understand the world that we live in. The need to understand these core elements of our existence are as old as time, and it's evident in the multitude of religious texts dating back tens of thousands of years, some of them. People just have a longing to understand where we come from and why we're here. But creating and maintaining an identity is essential to the survival of a civilization, even more so when the culture encounters the attempted destruction of their identity, like the Israelites. And in trying to create an identity, the author of Genesis uses Adam as a literary device to explain and account for their turmoil. Just a brief outline. You have the creation, you have the fall of man, and then you have the exile from the garden, and that's something that's very much repeated. The promised land. We see parallels of that and Eden. How everything's just going to be perfect and everything's going to be okay. If you just do this.
1 minute.
Okay, 1 minute. Thank you. Okay, so just real quick, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, 2. And the earth was formless and void. So this formless void is transformed by God over 6 days, according to Kent, into an earth that is ordered and filled. 6 literal days, and 7 times God saw that his creations were good. Each day is a day. It can be interpreted as a certain extended period of time, but since Kent believes that they are literal days, and I appreciate that. That honesty. I'm not going to get into that much further. And again, I think that's another opening statement. So I'm going to go ahead and concede the rest of my time to the opening discussion, or to the open discussion. Sorry.
Okay then. So resetting the timer for Dr. Hovind. 8 minutes when you begin speaking. So.
Well, thank you so much, Jim. I appreciate that. Looks like I won already because you didn't discuss the biblical creation account. You claimed it was the Babylonian one, and I would disagree. It's not. So I think by default, I already won. We're here to discuss, is there evidence for biblical creation? Evidence is an interesting word. The available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true. In law, the rules of evidence govern the types of evidence that are admissible. There are 15 different types of evidence, and I'll cover that in just a minute. The Bible clearly teaches in the beginning, God created the heaven, and heaven is singular, and the earth. So that's what it claims, and it claims in Exodus 20 in the Ten Commandments, in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is. So here we have a claim by a book claiming that God created the heaven. And we have a claim by Jesus that he's the one who created the heaven, because Jesus is God Almighty in the flesh. He said, have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? Matthew 19:4, same thing in Mark 10:6. That was the beginning of the creation. The Bible clearly teaches that man brought death into the world, whereas evolution teaches death brought man into the world, a complete polar opposite. By man came death, in Adam all die. So the Bible is clearly claiming the creation account was perfect, it was wonderful, it was lovely, and man messed it up. And the Bible clearly teaches that Adam was the first man, and his wife Eve was the mother of all living. Everybody came from Eve, and Adam was 130 when his son was born, and the dates are all given in Genesis chapter 5, and you can make a chart like I've done and use in all my seminars. The Bible clearly teaches the world was created about 4000 BC, plus or minus maybe 50 years for adjustments in chronology. But that's what it teaches, okay, about 6,000 years ago. Textbook says the earth is billions of years old. Somebody's clearly wrong. So Jesus claimed the creation of Adam was the beginning, which means he was lying, or he didn't understand science, or maybe he was right. And there are those who claim maybe the days are periods of time. Like you mentioned, I do not believe that. There are two verses, Psalm 90 and 2 Peter 3, that say a day is like 1,000 years. That was called the day-age theory, introduced in 1820. I do not believe that. It doesn't work for all sorts of reasons. We can bring it up during rebuttal if you'd like. But the grass and trees, according to the Bible account, were made on day 3, and the sun made on day 4. Well, then the trees are going to die if those days are 1,000 years each. So no, it's clearly a literal 24-hour day creation. That's what it says, and I go through all that in my seminar. Okay, let me skip this for sake of time to get into, the Bible warns us that there would be scoffers in the last days who would be willingly ignorant of the creation. They don't understand what was that creation like. They don't understand the flood that overflowed the world, and they sure don't understand the coming judgment of God, the creation, the flood, and the coming judgment of God. Okay, if you find an arrowhead laying in a pile of gravel, what do you conclude? Where's the evidence? Was this man-made, or is this naturally occurring? Well, it's made of natural components like rock, but what kind of evidence would show us that somebody created this? Can we look at the biblical creation account? Well, there's analogical evidence, the kind you don't use in court. There's anecdotal evidence, where you make an analogy with something else. There's character reference evidence. There's circumstantial evidence. There's demonstrative evidence. There's digital evidence. Someone left behind a recording or something like that. I think there's digital evidence. I don't know if you've studied the Bible codes, but they're pretty fascinating. Just Google Bible code. There's a lot on the internet, pro and con. Many books have been written on the topic of the signature of God written in the Bible codes. Not only is the Bible written in Hebrew, Old Testament, you can skip certain letters and get another code. Every 13 letters in Deuteronomy chapter 10 gives the phrase, in the bitter sea of Auschwitz. If you skip and go every 22 letters, it gives the name Hitler. They find all kinds of, you can study this forever, the biblical codes. Proverbs says it's the glory of God to reveal a thing, or to conceal a thing. For instance, in Deuteronomy 10, Hitler is found at every 22 letter intervals in the Hebrew. Auschwitz is found going backwards at every 13 letters, and you can study all that on yourself. But there are many folks who study this and say, the secrets of the Torah are revealed in the skipping of the letters. There's a code written within the code. Rips explained that each code is a case of adding every fourth letter to form a word. Read the code. Every fourth letter says read the code. So this is a code written within the code. I think the Bible has thousands of those. My computer messed up, but the circles are not in the right spot. But in the book of Genesis, every 49 letters says Torah, going one direction. Exodus says Torah every 49 letters. Numbers says Torah every 49 letters going the other direction. And Deuteronomy has the word Torah every 49 letters going the other direction. And the book of Leviticus, the middle of those 5 books, has the word God in Hebrew. So Genesis, Exodus point one way toward God. Numbers, Deuteronomy point the other way toward God. Just the Bible codes. I think that would be digital evidence that possibly somebody wrote this who's way beyond our intelligence. I don't think you could find a human today that could write a book. You couldn't get a computer to write a book like that. There is direct evidence for the creation. There's documentary evidence. We have a document. It says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So the Bible, it would be documentary evidence. Now, whether it's true or not is a different story. But here we have a Bible claiming that God did it. There's forensic evidence. This is what you guys would count as your fossil evidence. I point out no fossil counts in an honest court of law for any evidence for evolution. All you know is the creature died. You don't know it had any children. You sure couldn't prove it had children that lived, and you certainly couldn't prove it had children that lived that were different. No animal today produces any other kind of animal. There is no forensic evidence for any animal changing to anything else. The Bible says they will always bring forth after their kind. I think the forensic evidence is clearly in favor of the Bible being true. That's all any farmer in the planet has ever observed in human history. Cows produce cows, dogs produce dogs, without exception. There is hearsay evidence. There is physical evidence. I think if you find an arrowhead, you would say, wow, this is physical evidence that somebody made this. Now, who made it? Don't know. When did he make it? I don't know. We can study that out. But somebody made it. That's obvious. There's prima facie evidence. There is statistical evidence. There is testimonial evidence. There's many different kinds of evidence. I would point out, Jim, that I think the overwhelming evidence is that the creation account, even though other accounts were written first, like the Gilgamesh epic, not Gilgamesh, but the Babylonian story, they may have been written first, but Moses didn't rely on those at all. Moses got direct inspiration from God. You've not demonstrated that he copied those. If there are similarities between Moses' account and Babylonian account, it could be because the sons of Noah were spreading this story to their children and grandchildren. And of course, there are going to be similarities, maybe a little perverting with time. But sure, there are similarities in the creation stories. We've got a boot camp coming up next month. Come on down, June 14, 15, 16, where people will be speaking about that very topic. Paul Abramson speaking on the 300 plus flood legends that have been found around the world. Of course, there would be flood legends. People would talk about that for a long time after the real flood in the days of Noah. So I don't think you've demonstrated that Moses copied from the Babylonian one. It could be that the Babylonian one is a perversion of the original story, and Moses got it exactly dead center right, inspired by God, probably from eyewitness accounts that he collected. He was going to be Pharaoh of Egypt, had access to the best library in the world. He probably had the original accounts that these all got twisted from. I think you've got it backwards, claiming he copied from Babylon. I think Babylon's a perversion of the real truth. Thank you so much.
All right, that concludes Dr. Hovind's opening statement. Jim, you're going to have your 5-minute rebuttal, and Dr. Hovind has his 5-minute rebuttal. So, Jim, when you begin speaking, you have 5 minutes to rebut what Dr. Hovind has said.
Jim's on mute. Jim, if you just want to unmute yourself there. Sorry, man.
Sorry about that. Okay, thank you so much, Kent.
That's okay.
Okay, I agree with Kent that cows do not produce cows, or cows produce cows and dogs produce dogs. You don't see a non-cow coming from a cow, and you don't see a non-dog coming from a dog. And I agree 100%. And that is not what science claims, but I'm not debating evolution today. We're debating whether or not the biblical creation account is true, whether or not there's evidence for that. And I still argue that there's not. Kent mentioned for a moment that there was prima facie evidence, or maybe he was just saying that was the type of evidence. I'm not sure whether he was claiming or not there's prima facie evidence for the biblical creation, but I'd be interested in hearing it if he does believe that. By Kent saying that, Moses didn't copy from Babylonian and everything like that, sure. That's a good possibility, because the things that he posts that he's writing in there, the things that are written in the creation account are something that's congruent with Bronze Age cosmology, with the firmament and things like that. It was an ancient understanding of how the world worked. So no, maybe he didn't copy from that, but the fact that it was written before that, Moses dying in 1500 BCE, so we're talking, gosh, 16,000 years plus before that. The earliest mention of the Babylonian gods. So either he would be saying that God appeared to two different people, that he appeared to somebody else first who recorded the texts that are mentioned in the 7th century copy of the Enuma Elish that we found, or he's saying that it's like a brutal cycle, or maybe it's like I said in my opening statement, and it's that society's attempt at creating an identity for themselves, at taking what they know or what they thought they know about how our cosmos works and how our universe works, and applying that, adding in their own theology to further give them credibility in holding that belief, give them justification for holding it, and say, look, this is how the world works, and this God did it. And it was a way of closing the gaps in our understanding. And I think that Kent would agree with me that as time has gone on, as time has gone on, we can see clearly in the history of religion how the gaps in our understanding of the universe close. And also paralleled with that, in an equal ratio, we also see a decline in the definition of God, of who God is. God's powers are limited more and more with the more that we understand how our universe works and why we're here. How much time do I have left?
You've got 2 minutes, 15 seconds.
Okay, and I want to address Kent's claim of kinds. You know, I've seen Kent make this claim several times. It's something that truly bothers me because for one, there's no evidence that we come from kinds, but the way that Kent describes kinds, you know, things being produced from, you know, something else, and I believe that he accepts the evidence for natural selection and for deviations in physiology as due to extreme pressures from environments. But there's no scientific evidence that everything evolves from a certain kind. I believe what you're trying to use is the scientific term speciation, which I would agree with you there with speciation. But eventually, you through speciation, you get an animal that can no longer reproduce with its original form, with whatever it came from, and then you have to explain, you know, well, why is that? If they are of the same kind, then why can't they reproduce? Maybe it's something entropic. Maybe that's what you're trying to claim. I don't know. I'll wait for that. With that being said, I will concede the rest of my time. I just want to also ask again for that prima facie evidence, or for you to clarify on what you meant by that. Thank you.
Okay, so you had 40 seconds left. Okay, Dr. Hovind, you have 5 minutes to rebut.
And then, okay, go ahead. I just want to make sure Dr. Hovind was unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Well, let's see, several things. I would say Moses did not copy from the Babylonians. The Babylonians probably had a twisted version of an original story handed down from Grandpa, and Moses had the right one. So you haven't demonstrated that you proved that he copied it, even though he wrote it later. If any cop will tell you, you can go to an accident scene, get 5 witnesses. The first one may or may not be correct, the first one to tell the story. So you asked about kinds. The Bible says very clearly 10 times in the first chapter, they will bring forth after their kind. And 10 more times in the flood story. Variations certainly happen, as you mentioned, but they have severe limits. Anybody knows that. Farmers breed for bigger pigs all the time, but they're never going to get a pig as big as Texas. There are limits. Roaches become resistant to pesticides. They will never become resistant to a sledgehammer. There are limits to the variations. I do not believe kinds equals species. I don't think our modern classification system by Carolus Linnaeus has anything to do with biblical kinds. It may or may not match in some places with species. It may match with genus. It may match with family. But the kind is clear. These are the same kind of animal. They're tigers, okay? Animals always produce the same kind. That's not evolution. The information for that variety has to already be in the gene code. New information is never added. Dogs don't become pink or learn to fly because of the variations. They're still dog. And the gene pool of the new variety is always more limited and generally less likely to survive. The Chihuahuas cannot produce Great Danes, but Chihuahuas and Great Danes came from a common ancestor. And Chihuahuas wouldn't last in the real world, okay? There are varieties of corn, hundreds of varieties of corn. Where I grew up in Illinois, they got them all numbered when you drive down the cornfield. But they're still corn. Some have sweeter taste, some have more disease resistant, some grow in drier soil, wetter soil. It's still corn. You're never going to get a whale, a hamster, or a tomato to grow on your corn stalk. There are varieties of ear shapes and nose shapes in the world. No question, there's still an ear. All kinds of varieties of eyes, varieties of foot shapes. There's still a foot. How many varieties of human hands are there? Quite a few. Varieties of human lips. There's still a lip. 339 recognized breeds of dogs, but they're still a dog. So that is not evidence for evolution at all. The Bible says they will always bring forth after their kind. And the topic of this debate is there evidence for biblical creation? The biblical account says they're going to bring forth after their kind. That's all we've ever observed. So in a court of law, the judge would have to say, yep, there is evidence that animals always bring forth after their kind. There may be ring species. You go around Grand Canyon and get the Kaibab squirrel and the Abert squirrel. They're still a squirrel. Still a squirrel. No exceptions. You may get animals that are isolated, genetically isolated for a while, and they develop unusual traits, nature selected that trait to survive, like the wolves survive better up in Alaska, and the dingoes survive better in Australia, where it's hot. They're still dog. They have miniature horses, little bitty horses, and big horses today, but they're still a horse. Horses, zebras, and donkeys, and may have come from a common ancestor. I don't know. But they're still obviously, to a third grader, they're still obviously the same kind of animal. But you guys, because we cannot define exactly where the word kind is in every situation, I think that would be a valuable field of research, But therefore, because the exact definition can't be given, that's supposed to prove that horses are related to mosquitoes, which is what you guys teach. Just because we can't name is a zebra and a quagga the same kind, probably, I don't know. But see, I'm not demanding that my theory be taught in the school system. You guys are demanding that your religion of evolution be taught in the school system, so the burden of proof's on you, not me. I think a tiger and a lion may be the same biblical original kind. They can no longer reproduce, but they originally could. They could bring forth after their kind. There's hundreds of varieties of cows, and we go through this in my seminar, part 4.
1 minute.
Sure. 300 varieties, I don't know how many varieties of chickens there are. You mentioned about that in the opening before we went on camera. Yeah, there's a lot of chickens. And they might have had a common ancestor called a chicken. There are 8 varieties of bears in the world. They might have had a common ancestor. It would have been a bear. This is not proof that bears are related to mosquitoes and tomatoes. I don't understand how anybody with half a brain can believe bears and mosquitoes are related if they draw lines on paper back to a common ancestor. The line on paper is not evidence. The Bible says they will bring forth after their kind. And I think that's all we've ever observed. That's all we have scientific evidence for. So I think I won the debate. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. Well, that concludes the rebuttal period. Now we have a 25-minute discussion period coming up. So let me set my timer for that, and the two of you can have open discussion about the subject. What's the evidence for biblical creation? So I'm going to start the timer. 25 minutes for discussion. Have at it.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Do you mind if I go first?
Please do.
Great. So I want to correct something that you made in your claim. Tigers and lions can reproduce. It's known as ligers, or they're called tigans or tigans, I believe.
Tigons or ligers. Depends which one is the male. Right.
Correct. And in fact, there has been evidence, I believe, of a female liger reproducing with a male lion or a male tiger. That may be wrong. But so I guess I would have to see what that taxonomy looks like, because whenever you say kinds, that's very vague, and I heard a lot of mites in there. So I mean, do you have a working taxonomy that fits with the model of the known species in the world?
Well, I don't think anybody would argue a tiger and a lion are both in the cat family.
Sure, I agree.
Every retractable claws. Dogs don't have retractable claws. Cats do. I think all cats do. I don't know.
Yes,
but
I believe so.
To look at this tiger and lion situation and say they can reproduce. Okay, they may be divergent from an original created kind that was somewhere between the two. I don't know how many kinds of cats God made in the Garden of Eden. Doesn't matter to me. There might have been 50 varieties of birds that he made, and they've now diversified into thousands of varieties of birds. They're still bird, or in this case, they're still cat. Lion, tiger, and jaguar, and leopards are still the same kind of animal, a cat.
But in Genesis, when it's talking about the kinds, it actually lists different birds as after their kind. Is he talking about birds in general, or those specific types of birds? Like I know you have an argument about the woodpecker. Do you believe that the woodpecker is a kind all of its own?
I don't know how many varieties of woodpeckers there are. Quite a few, actually, varieties of woodpeckers. There's the red-headed woodpecker.
Sure.
I'm not an expert on birds, but let's assume pick a number and say God created 50 kinds of birds.
Okay.
I don't think woodpeckers are ancestral, have an ancestor common with eagles or hummingbirds. I would just be a guess on my part. This is called baraminology. There's a website, baraminology.com. Baramin is the Hebrew word for kind. Baraminology.com is a group of folks trying to solve exactly this. How many kinds of animals did Noah take on the ark?
So,
of course, Noah is not required to take insects or fish, only animals on land in whose nostrils was the breath of life. But their current guess is about 8,000 kinds of animals had to go onto the ark. This would exclude anything in the water because they have plenty of water outside. So how many kinds of bird? Is a woodpecker the same kind as an eagle? I'd say probably not. But
Sure.
keep in mind, I am not asking my theory to be taught in school at taxpayer expense. You guys who believe woodpeckers and mosquitoes and tomatoes are related, you believe a woodpecker is related to a tomato, don't you? If you go back far enough?
I believe that there are DNA similarities. I wouldn't say that they're related necessarily. I think that would be a gross misrepresentation of what relation is.
If I can show you a chart from the textbooks, and there are thousands of them, showing birds and mosquitoes and tomatoes going back with lines to a common ancestor that was single-celled. That is what the books teach. I think you have to admit that. So at least the textbooks teach birds, mosquitoes, and tomatoes have a common ancestor. Somewhere way back there, long ago and far away. That's not science. That's nonsense.
So looking at your claim, you're talking about woodpeckers and eagles and storks, and we can name a variety of birds that can't necessarily interbreed and that are very much different. Flamingos,
Sure.
ostriches. Prima facie, looking at a hummingbird, looking at an eagle, looking at a hawk, looking at them all side by side, prima facie, without any text, whether it be a textbook or a Bible, wouldn't you agree that they likely have a common ancestor?
No. The fact that there are similarities, i.e. they have feathers, just birds that have feathers, there are at least two basic types, those that can fly and those that can't.
Sure, I'm referring to more like bone structure. I mean, when you take like an eagle and a hummingbird, for example, the hummingbird has a longer beak for accessing nectar,
Right.
and the eagle, it has talons and a sharp beak for ripping apart its prey. But you take away the feathers, you take away the meat, and you just look at the bones and the bone structures, and there's an incredible amount of similarities there. So did God create different kinds that looked alike?
Well, I think if you look at all the cars built by General Motors or say Chevrolet,
Sure.
and if you take away the paint, take away the body, take away the electrical, I think you find the frame of many of them is probably identical.
Right.
There are some that come down the line and they use the exact same frame to build a 2-door or a 4-door or a hatchback. That's proof of a common designer. That's an engineering feat, not ancestral. So somebody engineered it where the same frame can supply, 2-door, 4-door, hatchback, pickup maybe. But
Could an intelligent designer not have created simple organisms that would have been able to evolve a frame, so to speak, that evolved into different hatchbacks or sedans or coupes or whatever?
Well, there's no evidence of any animal changing to anything other kind. So that would be, there's no evidence of it.
There's millions of transitional fossils, but I mean, I really don't want to get into evolution. I would rather stay on the creation claim in Genesis.
I think the creator of the kinds gave us overwhelming evidence that it had to be created. He used the same frame for the birds. Generally, they have a similar shoulder joint and hip joint, okay? But he used a completely different idea for insects. They have the skeleton on the outside, exoskeleton. And so he gave it so that there's so much evidence that you'd have to be a fool to not see there's a designer here. He can design animals that can live with the skeleton on the outside or skeleton on the inside. Are there cars that have the frame on the outside, like a unibody? Well, yeah, actually there are. But again, That's a design, an engineering feat, not ancestral.
Well, I'll agree with you that it's a design feat in that it suits a purpose. Like, for example, a roll cage in NASCAR, it has a purpose. It's not in every car, but it's in NASCAR because if the car flips, you want to protect the driver. And right. I mean, all I'm seeing in exoskeletons and things of that nature, things used for both defense and offense, are just attributes that are attained through the pressures of their environment that they change and adapt to.
So you think the exoskeleton came as a result of pressures from the environment? In other words, the insect developed this to prevent himself from being eaten. Defense.
I'm not saying that that's why it prevented it, but I'm saying that the ones who did produce it, who did have an exoskeleton, that they were the ones who were more suitable to survive within their environment.
And you realize, of course, what you're stating is not based on evidence. It's based on a theoretical belief that there's nobody's ever seen any animal start to gradually produce an exoskeleton.
Well, sure, and we've never seen a star born. We've never seen a star's life cycle, but we have looked at multiple stars, and we have seen multiple stages of growth and death within stars that we have been able to make an amalgamation and a better understanding of the life cycle of the star, even though we haven't observed the full life cycle of a star with the human eye.
Well, you're starting with your religious belief that stars do indeed go through a cycle and are born and die. I think
that's not a religious belief, Kent.
I think it is. Okay. Suppose I had a belief that cars came from slowly evolved. I could show you evidence that there are one-wheeled vehicles out there called unicycles. I could show you evidence that there are two-wheeled vehicles, bicycles, motorcycles. I could show you and bring in physical evidence there are three-wheeled vehicles. I could actually arrange them in order: one-wheel, two-wheel, three-wheel, four-wheeler. Does that prove that's how it happened? No. Not at all.
Not.
And you guys arranging these things in order that you already think it happened, that's where the problem is. You're doing exactly like I would be if I arranged the vehicles in order from 1, 2, 3, 4 wheel. That's not science.
If you group them by the wheel, but you are grouping them by kinds, and that is not science, because there's no scientific evidence to support your claim of kinds.
There is overwhelming scientific observable evidence that dogs produce dogs, and that's it. Never an exception.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And the evolutionary model actually supports that. You don't see a non-dog coming from a dog in the evolutionary model, unless you're speaking in extreme hyperbole. Unless you're speaking in hyperbole.
Think what you just said. Dogs will always produce dogs. However, going back in time, which we cannot do, but if you could go back in time, the dog came from an amoeba or a single-cell creature, which was certainly a non-dog. So somewhere along the line, the amoeba produced a non-amoeba, and the amoeba, you think, turned into both a dog and a mosquito, because you have lines on paper connecting them. Then somewhere, even though today mosquitoes only produce mosquitoes and dogs only produce dogs, you in your imagination think dogs and mosquitoes are related, so it had to come from something that was non-amoeba or bacteria. So why could it could happen in the past, but it can't happen today? So we can't observe it, or it's not science.
So we don't see a non-dog coming from a dog. We don't see a dog coming from a non-dog. And you say there's no reason to believe that, because we can't go back in time to observe that. So what I want to know is why you feel so confident in the claim that men came from mud and the breath of a deity, when you can't go back, and there's no evidence that we came from mud. There's no scientific evidence to support that.
Well, General Motors makes all their cars out of natural components that come right out of the ground. They take iron ore, melt it down, make the iron. They add a little nickel or other elements to it, depending on what kind of steel they want. So you could argue that a car is made of 100% natural components, but it had a designer to do it. The mud didn't turn itself into a car, but they took the elements out of the dirt or the mud or the rock. So to say that...
How do you know that?
Well, we know it because we observe it. We did not observe God create man.
We've never observed man coming from mud. Never.
No, we do observe cars coming from natural components. We can observe them digging out the iron ore, melting it down, making the iron, forging it into shape. Every step of a car production can be observed. We do not observe God making man from the mud. I agree. That's why it's a belief. You do not observe a mosquito and a dog coming from a common ancestor. That's why it's a belief. But it's taught in the textbooks, and we're all paying for that religion to be taught. This one says animals, fungi, and plants have a common ancestor. But that's not science. That's
but automobiles do not reproduce that's a fallacy, I believe. I mean, because we're not talking about something that can reproduce. We're talking about something that does have a designer, but it's designed to suit a purpose. It's designed to suit a need to fill a slot, so to speak. And your creation account is nothing more than that. It is a creation, a design to fill a spot, and that spot is solidifying the identity of ancient Israelites, of ancient Canaanites, of ancient Babylonians, depending on which creation myth that you want to read.
Well, sure, you can believe that. This is straight from one of the textbooks used today. It says animals, fungi, and plants have a common ancestor. Do you believe fungus and elephants and tomatoes are related, have a common ancestor? That's what we're all paying for this to go in the textbooks.
So when you say believe, do I just believe that? No, but do I accept that other people have done the research, and do I accept the evidence? Then yes, I do. And I would like to add that I find it much more plausible than to say that God did it, and he created us from mud, and that plants lived for an entire day in sub-zero temperatures without a sun.
Well, you brought up several topics that need to be addressed there, but you guys keep wanting to use the word accept. You accept evolution. You have to believe evolution. You guys keep trying to sneak that in. You have to accept truth. You do not have to, but you have to believe that mosquitoes are related. This textbook,
you can believe it, but there's evidence for that belief. There's justification to believe that.
Okay, I think there's evidence to prove dogs always produce dogs and cows always produce cows. That's where the evidence lies.
Do you believe there's evidence that man was created from mud?
No, I think we're made out of natural elements. I think you could find all the elements for man's body in the mud.
So you're interpreting that part allegorically because it doesn't suit your narrative.
I'm saying there is a narrative. There's a book that says God did it. I don't know of a better answer, but I'm not
and you're interpreting part of it literally and part of it allegorically to fix whatever gaps you have in your understanding.
Well, no, you guys are one of the ones with all the gaps in the understanding. We observe cows produce cows, dogs produce dogs.
That's okay. It's okay to have gaps, Ken.
Well, then call it, then stop saying you accept it. Admit you believe it. It's a belief. It's a religion on your part.
Okay, I believe it, but I have justification for my belief.
I have justification for my belief. Nobody's ever seen a cow produce a non-cow. Therefore, somebody must have made the original cow.
You do have justification for your own belief, for your belief, but your belief itself does not have justification to be believed by anybody who would, other than people who would just accept it on faith.
Well, I think you need to look in the mirror. Jim, you're the one who has a belief that is not based on any scientific evidence. This textbook shows all the bats in the world are related to the horses and are related to the mice. They put them all together to draw. What they draw lines on paper is all they do. On the outside
no,
of the
that's not all they do, Kent. No, the current working evolutionary model has been used for many things, from developing antibiotics to discovering how bacteria works. The current evolutionary model works every day in laboratories, and we make new discoveries because we operate under the assumption that we evolve. Well,
the same laboratories could use the assumption that, wow, a designer made these creatures out of the same 92 elements out of the ground. Maybe there are antibiotics that can be used because they have a common ancestor, common designer.
And we'd be wasting our time because scientists would be trying to figure out what kind of mud God used and what his breath contained, what the atmospheric contents of his breath were. And that's absurd because there's no need to go to that when there's already a working model. Now, if you want to debunk the working model and you want to show inconsistencies, then I would encourage you to accept your Nobel Prize.
Well, I think if you went to North Korea, you would not find any opposition to the idea of communism.
Sure.
I think anybody
who
opposes
actually, I disagree. If you go into the individual homes that are being oppressed, I'm sure that there would be some.
If anyone dares to speak out against communism, they end up, executed or down the bottom of the Pacific Ocean someplace.
Right. Excommunicated for heresy, so to speak.
I think we have a very similar, not quite as severe, but same thing with those who oppose evolution in the academic circles. It wasn't this way 200 years ago. But evolution religion has slowly taken over our school system, where now if you dare to oppose it, you don't get published, you don't get promoted, you actually get fired. Watch the movie Expelled to see those who say, look, I don't think evolution works. They'll get fired from their job.
Sure, because we're talking about the separation of church and state. People who make these assumptions under theological presuppositions do not need to be teaching in the public school system. They do not need to be funded by our government, which clearly states that there needs to be a separation between theology and government.
Thank you. I would point out those who believe mosquitoes and tomatoes are related, regardless of how much time you want to give them, should not be allowed to teach that to children.
I don't believe that people should be allowed to teach anything that cannot be demonstrated. I don't believe people should be allowed to teach anything there's not evidence to believe that, such as God created man and then later created woman from his side. I think it's totally absurd. And again, there's no evidence that women were made from man. I mean, we can go into the different creation accounts. We can go into authorship and everything like that. I don't think it's necessary, but I do encourage you to read the difference in accounts as far as to when God made woman between the account in Genesis 1 and the account in Genesis 2.
Yeah, I could not prove scientifically that woman was made from a rib from man. I think we can show that there are obvious structural similarities, and digestive tract is about identical, and there are thousands of identical systems between man and women. Praise God for the differences too, but there are obviously some similarities. Again, I would say that may be an indication of a common designer, just like the Ford, just like the 2-door and the 4-door and the hatchback have same frame, same electrical system, same paint job. It doesn't prove common ancestor.
You just said that you had evidence that women was created from a rib. Can you
I cannot prove that. I can't prove that scientifically. That's what the text says. Oh, but by the way, you can't disprove that either.
Well, I mean, I can't disprove that women wasn't made by scrunching up some silk and wrapping it in duct tape.
That's not what the text says. The text says the woman was made from man's rib. The purpose of this debate is the evidence of the biblical creation. Do you have any evidence to counter that? Forget the duct tape. The Bible says Eve was made from a rib. By the way, there's only one bone in the human body that'll grow back if you take it out, and that's your rib.
Well, I would like to clarify, to point out that you said that there is no evidence that a woman was created from a rib. So I'm sure you've heard this saying, that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So there's no reason for me to try to disprove it, because you haven't in any way proved that women came from a rib.
Okay, that which has no evidence can be dismissed. There is no evidence a dog came from anything other than a dog. Not going forward.
Yes, there is.
Produce dogs in the future. If you think in the past a dog came from a non-dog, there's no evidence of a dog ever coming from a non-dog. We can dismiss the whole evolution theory. There is no evidence of any dog coming from a non-dog in the past.
There's no evidence of the 6,000-year-old Earth, Ken.
That's what you're changing topics here. You're diverging, okay?
No, I'm talking about claims versus evidence for the claims. And I would argue that I have much more evidence. Now, while it's not complete, while it is, yes, it is a theory, but it is a working theory. There is truth within the theory. If anything in there conflicts with what we know to be true, then it's thrown out. It's no longer considered a theory, Kent, like gravity.
Well, then throw it out, because we've only seen dogs produce dogs, and you think dogs and mosquitoes have a common ancestor. Throw that theory out, son. That's not science.
Yeah, there is genetical information. There's genetical data that ties us all together. Do you deny that?
We don't. Well, that could be a common design. I think the Fords and the Chevys are both made out of steel. Comes on from the same dirt. Doesn't prove they're
yes, and they're also not living beings. So I think that's a false representation.
Well, you're giving a false representation, saying, "Wow, look, we don't see dogs always produce dogs in the future, but in the past, you think it was different." That's not science. That's a religion. You believe dogs came from something single-celled. You believe that single-celled creature produced something that was ultimately turned into a dog. This is a religious belief, Jim. This is not science. And I wish you guys would.
And what do you believe? What do you believe? Where do you believe the animals came from? Where do you believe man came from?
I don't see any other option than to say there must be a designer that made this. If I walked into a town that was deserted out west, John Wayne, a deserted desert town, a cowboy town, I look at these buildings, say, wow, there's nobody here, but I think somebody built these buildings. I could walk into a town, I could find an arrowhead and say, I think somebody made this. I don't know who, I don't know when, but somebody made it. I think you can look at a mosquito under a microscope and say, wow, this has amazing design, digestive system. It can fly, for heaven's sake. That's complicated. It can reproduce. You talk about a complicated system. Reproduction is mind-bogglingly complex in all the things that have to happen just right. Any system, the eyes, of the smelling system is so complex, I would say it's logical to say there's a designer. Now, who is that designer? Is it Allah, Buddha, Jehovah? That becomes a different set of arguments. But to get over hurdle number one, somebody designed the mosquito.
Okay, so you believe that this was all designed and it was done by a creator, and it is centered around us, I believe. I believe that you believe that humans and the God of the Bible have a unique connection, correct?
Oh, yeah, I believe there's three different kinds of life. I think
if that is the case, then why is it that out of out of all my apologies, out of the entire electromagnetic spectrum, humans can only see less than 0.004 of it. It's like 0.0035% of the entire electromagnetic spectrum.
Right.
Humans, for example, in wavelength reception, humans can only recept somewhere between 380 to 740 nanometers. But you
Right.
have beings like the mantis shrimp, who I don't believe are hoping for salvation, or that they were created for any divine purpose, and yet their wavelength reception is much better than ours, 300 to 720, so a much wider range of wavelength reception. So there's so much that is created that is not for us. In Genesis 1, it tells us that these stars were made to be signs for planting crops and signs for recognizing the changes of the seasons. And some would argue that it's the zodiac. But it
2
says
minutes,
that
gentlemen.
they were created for that reason, yet we know for a fact that there are stars in our universe that not only have we not seen with the naked eye, but we will probably never see.
And how do you know that for a fact?
Well, are you familiar with the term the universe horizon, or the horizon effect?
Yeah, yes, I understand. I believe you're probably true, but you don't know that that's correct. I'm just pointing out this is a belief. I believe the same thing.
Okay, yes, I don't know in an epistemological sense, as in it hasn't been demonstrated to be completely true. Like I'm not holding it in my hands. You're right. There is no conclusive study. But at the same time, I have justification to believe that, and there's no reason for me to say, well, God created these stars for humans, and well, this has to be all there is because the Bible says so.
Okay, I have justification. If I walk into a deserted cowboy town out west, I would have justification for believing somebody made this. Even
Yes,
though
and you can find out who. You can find out who through archaeology. You can find out through experimenting from the past, from testing.
Okay, let's allow Dr. Hovind just to have equal time with response there. Go ahead, Dr. Hovind. Finish your sentence.
The buildings in this cowboy town are made out of wood and probably nails, which are made from iron. Those are natural components. We can see trees growing all over, but we never see wood cut into those shapes and nailed together in that way. It would be logical to say somebody built this building or made this town, laid it out in a street down the middle, and buildings on the side. Maybe there's a reason for that, traffic flow. I think we can study the human body or the body of a mosquito or a star and say there's a reason for this. If you'd rather be a mantis shrimp to get their eyes, that's up to you. Go ahead and swap eyes if you'd like. But I think maybe a reason we see a small part of the spectrum is that God's got a big surprise for us when we go to heaven. Hey, guys, new eyes, you can see the whole thing. You can now see the sounds. Whoa, that'll be cool. I don't know, but I'm looking forward to going there. I would like you to come too, Jim. Would you like to come?
It would be cool, Kent. I do not disagree with you. It would be cool to go to an afterlife where I don't hurt anymore, where my senses are enhanced, where I didn't have to worry about anything, where I could see my loved ones, I could meet my family. I could experience all this peace. But
That's time, gentlemen.
But
it's available.
There's no evidence
you can have it.
that is true.
It is true. I've got it already.
Okay, so now, gentlemen, we have 4-minute closings, and so Jim started first, so he does his closing first, and so let me reset my timer for 4 minutes. It's not responding too well. Here we go. Okay, Jim, 4 minutes when you start speaking.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to point out that, as usual, Kent has not given evidence for his claim. He's only given evidence against other claims. And to me, that is very disingenuous, especially whenever he claims to have a belief and he claims to have a monopoly on the truth. Not just a truth, but the truth. And again, I would ask the question, why did God create stars that his creation would never see? Why did God create colors that his creation would never see? Not just any creation, though, but his special creation. God saw that it was very good. This was something that was special to God. God created humans for a reason, and the early understanding in the ancient Near East was that the creators made this God for us to experience, for us to enjoy. Yet we have a light and a heat source that gives us cancer. We have plants that poison us. We have viruses and bacteria and molds and things that contaminate our bodies and kill us. We have so many illnesses that take children not only in the womb but at early ages for apparently no reason. And for Kent to say that there's a reason that we were created, he would have to also say that there is a reason for all of these horrible things that we experience that are supposedly products of a creator, yet do his creation no good. I will say again that I don't need evolution to disprove creation, and neither does anybody else. Creation can be disproven all on its own, and people like Kent Hovind have set up a false dichotomy to where it's one or the other. And that's just not the case, because he's leaving out things like Marduk and Tiamat, and how Tiamat's body was carved into half and was made into the firmament. He's denying these obvious parallels to theology and claiming that his is true solely because he has so much invested in it. I thank everybody for listening and for watching. Thank you, Kent, for showing up. Thank you, Standing for Truth, for having me. Nephilim Free, thank you for moderating. I had a really great time.
You got a minute and 40 seconds.
A minute and 40 seconds. I can sing a little ditty, maybe. No, I think that's okay. I'll let Kent close.
Okay, then I'll reset the timer for Kent for 4 minutes when you start speaking, Kent.
Well, okay. Well, thank you so much, Jim, for doing this. I know it's got to be difficult to try to defend the idea that we all came from a rock for no reason, and the idea that we go nowhere when it's over with. I would love to have you have the peace and assurance that you can indeed know. As far as why there are colors we cannot see, there are two options, I think, obvious from the creation viewpoint. A, maybe originally they could, and they lost it due to their sin. Or maybe someday we will gain it again, or maybe both are true. So it is interesting to contemplate the idea that maybe the whole electromagnetic spectrum was created for us, and right now we get just a limited part of it, okay? Is there evidence for biblical creation? Yes, I think there's overwhelming evidence. There had to be a creator, like walking into the cowboy town or finding an arrowhead. Somebody made this. Now, finding out who and why and when is a different story, but first hurdle you've got to get over, Jim, there's a God, and it's not you, and it's not Charlie Darwin, and it's not a religious theory like evolution. We never see any plant or animal produce anything other than what is obviously the same kind, and that's a common use word, a kind. Is a Chevy and a Ford pickup truck the same kind of vehicle? Yeah. Okay, anyway, Bible says in Romans chapter 1, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest. You could know. You could find an arrowhead and say, somebody made this. Unless you wanted to believe it happened by erosion or exfoliation or thermal expansion of the rock. But no, somebody made it. If you find a building, a Western town, somebody made it. Period. It's end of story. It's common sense. When you look at under a microscope and see a cell, you say, somebody made this. This is amazing design. One cell is more complicated than the space shuttle, most complex machine built by man that I'm aware of. God has showed it unto them. Next verse says, for the invisible things of him, God is invisible. Apparently, God is outside of time, space, matter, not affected by them. This is not 2019 in heaven. God's not even affected by time. Anyway, the invisible things from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. I can look at things that are made. I can look at this Snapple bottle and say, wow, this guy, whoever made this, pretty smart. They put a label on there so I can tell what's on the inside without having to open it. They put a lid for it so it doesn't spill when you tip it over. Wow, it fits the human hand pretty good. I think this must have been designed by somebody who was thinking. Okay, not a problem. I can look at the plants and say, wow, I can eat that plant, and that plant provides vitamins that my body needs. How did the plant get stuff that I need? I could say, wow, somebody must have designed the food to be eaten by humans. They glorified him not as God, it says in verse 21, neither were thankful. Jim, you haven't glorified God for his creation. I think you should. They became vain in their imagination, and their foolish heart was darkened. I think it is foolish to believe that a mosquito and a dog have a common ancestor. I think that's foolish.
1 minute.
Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. What has happened in the last 150 years? This crazy religion of evolution has taken over our school system and our government, just like the crazy system of communism has taken over quite a few countries, and the crazy teachings of Islam has taken over some countries. And if you dare to stand up and oppose Islam in a Muslim country, they'll cut your head off. If you dare to stand up and oppose communism in a communist country, you'll be in Siberia. If you dare to stand up and oppose evolution in our public school system, you'll be in academic Siberia. And praise God, they don't pay my salary. I'm not afraid of them. I'm not frightened by them at all. And I'll do 1,000 of these debates if I have to. I'll do one every day. The Bible has never been disproven. Is there scientific evidence for their creator? Well, is there scientific evidence an arrowhead was man-made? Yeah. I think it's intuitive. Somebody made it. I think the creation account is intuitive. Somebody made it. You're going to stand before him, Jeff. Come on, do a credential, and I'll give you I'll introduce you to Jesus.
That's time. All right, so that concludes the closing statements. Now, let me ask, Standing for Truth, are you there, brother? Are we going to have a question and answer session, or is this going to conclude the debate?
No, it looks like we just reached the hour mark. I've got 2 questions that I can ask really, really quick. Thanks for the lively debate, guys. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Dr. Hovind, for doing this. It was very fun, very profitable. First question that I have for Dr. Hovind. What is the best evidence for a 6,000-year-old Earth? Go ahead.
Well, I had a debate on this very topic a couple days ago, and it's all up on our YouTube channel, Kent Hovind Official. That was the title of the debate. What's the best evidence for 6,000? The Bible clearly teaches about 6,000. Just add up the dates. So we have documentary evidence that is 6,000 years old. Just like I could find documentary evidence that the property I live on was occupied by humans for the last 300 years. I could probably go back in the county records and find, there was a house here by a farmer here 150 years ago. Oh, okay. We find a few bricks up at the top on the North 40. There's some physical evidence that there used to be a house up there. Okay. Now, there is documentary evidence. The Bible is certainly a document, and it clearly teaches about 6,000. As far as scientific evidence, I think there's overwhelming scientific evidence the Earth and Moon and the whole system cannot be billions. I'm not aware of any that shows clearly 6,000 from the scientific, but I'm aware of some scientific evidence that shows clearly it can't be 4.5 billion, way less than probably a few million. The population of the Earth, the cooling down of the Earth, the slowing spin of the Earth, the recession of the Moon. I covered all that in the last debate up on Kent Hovind Official. Is there evidence for the Earth being 6,000 years old? Yes. The Bible clearly says 6,000, or it clearly indicates by adding up the dates, 6,000. That's a document that has never been disproven. So I'm going to stand on that one. Okay.
Okay, I appreciate that answer, Dr. Hovind. And then the other question would be for you, Jim. This one is from Caustic Soda. The question he asks is, numbers are objective. Every civilization that ever existed has always agreed 2 is a multiple of 1 thing. So is there an objective reality?
Yeah, so and it's a little bit of a controversial view that I have, so I'm probably gonna get torn up for this, but I do believe that there is an objective reality in that, say, hate, for example. I can hate somebody. I have the potential, the ability to hate somebody, but I currently don't hate anybody right now, in case anybody is wondering. While I don't hate, it's not a part of my reality. It is part of my objective reality. So I believe that the objective reality is something that grows with experience, that grows with our knowledge, that grows with our exposure to new things and new information. So I believe that objective reality can be reached, but is never anything in the present. Does that make sense?
Awesome. Okay, well, I appreciate that response there, Jim. Guys, once again, great debate. Hopefully we can do it again sometime in the future. And everybody have a good day.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, today we are debating whether or not there is evidence for creationism, and we're starting right now. Hey everybody, thrilled to have you here. Oh man, it seems like it's been a long time already. I'm like just wishing to get back to this, and I am stoked for tonight's special debate as we have two experienced debaters. Both of these guys have debated a lot, not just on Modern Day Debate, but also on other channels and other places. So today is going to be especially epic. We are going to debate only the issue of creationism. So this won't actually be like a challenge of who's got more evidence they can provide, creationist or evolutionist. It's going to be just, hey creationist, what do you got? And we're going to critique it. Let's see if it stands up after the critique. So with that, I am thrilled to introduce these debaters. Standing for Truth has his link in the description below, and we'll give Standing just maybe a couple sentences if you want to share, Standing, what you've been up to at your channel. We appreciate you coming back, and so the floor is yours if you'd like to share about different projects that you've been working on as of late.
Well, thanks so much, James, for having me on, and thanks so much for the real James for joining me in this debate. The usual on my channel, I got a few series going on that people seem to be enjoying. Hosting some debates of my own. For example, I had Ken Hovind on last week with another couple planned in the next month or so. So if you guys like discussions, debates, just I guess random videos on creation, evolution, and the Bible, please subscribe to my channel. I think there's a lot of fun to come. Thanks, James.
Thank you. Thrilled to have you. And Jim Majors, who has helped out. Wait, by the way, can I just do a quick, I can't thank everybody because we'd be here all night. But I've got to say, one, in addition to thanking Standing for Truth for coming on, thanks to Jim Majors for coming on. Thanks to Jim Majors also for moderating for me when I was buried and dying. He has been just a super competent moderator, and that's to say the least. I think he's done superb. But also, want to say, Colorado Biker Prepper, if you guys see him in the live chat, he donated a computer that we're working on getting it set up. We just have to clear the hard drive. But basically, it's going to help us put out better video. So we're really thankful for that. We're also thankful for, I could go on and on and on. So we're going to come back to the thank you so I can let Jim introduce himself. But I just want to say I honestly am blown away by everybody's kindness and how this channel is really like a community effort, you could say. And so anyway, Jim Majors, stoked to have you here. His link is in the description, everybody. So you can check him out as well. And Jim, what have you been up to at he's just started his new channel, which has a unique name. And so anyway, I'll let you share, Jim. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having me. And again, thank you for Standing for Truth for joining me in this debate. I'm really super stoked about this, but I'm even more stoked about my channel. It's called Disciple of Kairos. And basically, I'll be doing the stuff that I debate about, with the exception of tonight for the most part. I usually don't debate on this topic, but James made me. I did get into a lot of biblical criticism, a lot of textual criticism, just really break down things that people usually just skim the surface of, and just explore things more, get into the internal evidence, external evidence, all the sources and everything, just basically putting all the information out and letting the people decide.
You betcha. Well, we appreciate that, Jim, and so I'm sure it's going to be interesting. So with that, forgot to say a couple of things. One, if it's your first time here, consider subscribing if you enjoy these types of debates, as we have a lot more coming up. As you can see down in that little marquee, I can almost reach down and grab those little letters out. We are thrilled to have Jake from Hugo and Jake debating this Wednesday against Logan M on whether or not Jordan Peterson has had a good effect or maybe more harmful effect on society. That will be provocative and more than that. So if you have a question during this debate, just feel free to put an @ModernDayDebate in the live chat, and then let us know which debater, or if you want, you can say it's for both debaters, your question is for. We will compile them into a list and ask them during the question and answer session. If you do a super chat, it actually opens it up. You can make a comment towards one of the speakers that they can have a chance to respond to during the question and answer. So in that case, it could be a comment and answer. So last, super chats automatically go to the top of the list. So that's throughout the debate or the Q&A. And with that, given that Standing for Truth is taking the affirmative, we will let Standing for Truth get started. And with that, this is going to be a kind of a hybrid style of debate. So I'll just quick go over the format just so people have an idea. That scared me for a second. Okay, he's just switching over to his PowerPoint. So I thought, I was like, oh no, we lost the picture. So I will let everybody know that we will have 8-minute openings. So this is going to be kind of a lightning type round style. Then 4-minute rebuttals. Then 20 minutes of open discussion or civil discourse. And then we're going to have 20 minutes, or I should say 5 minutes of closing statements, and then 20 minutes of Q&A. So it's going to be a great time. And Standing for Truth, if you are ready, I'm going to set the timer for your 8-minute statement, and then you can start, and I will basically start the timer on your first word.
All righty, just getting your faces out of the way. Just 1 second here. How's that? You can see everything okay there, James?
Definitely.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so thanks so much. Is there evidence for biblical creation? Let's get this going. So the Bible is the history book of the universe. Starting with this as an assumption, we can test the Bible to scientific discoveries and see how well this fits. The Bible tells us clearly that Adam is the father of all people. We read in Genesis 2:7, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. We see no evolutionary history of mankind here. There is not even a hint at fish-to-fisherman evolution in this verse. According to the Bible, we were made perfect and in the image of God. You mean this isn't Grandpa? Put a dress on your monkey and take her to the prom, guys. For those suffering from science denialism, if you think you're so vastly similar to an ape, do us all a favor and go find yourself a chimpanzee, dress her up nicely, put some makeup on her, and take her to the prom. See the looks you get and watch what people say about your hot date. A light bulb may finally go off in your head when you quickly realize that she's not so similar to you after all. Now, it's a direct prediction from the Bible and from a literal interpretation of Genesis that we are not related to apes, that we are actually specially created in the image of God, and that's actually what we see genetically. For example, when evolutionists or someone of an opposing worldview says that human and chimps, they're genetically identical by 98 to 99%, that's based on preferential and selective treatment of data. It's cherry-picked data. They're not including non-aligned DNA, gaps, copy number variations, and size differences. When you actually look at what the genetic identity is, it's less than 88%, and that's over 400 million DNA differences that actually exist between the two species. And there's significant DNA sequence discontinuity between the two genomes that evolution cannot explain or account for. Even the claimed human chromosome fusion number 2, that alleged site where the fusion supposedly took place actually represents a highly organized functional gene, and these shared genetic mistakes that you might have heard of as pseudogenes, those are actually now known to be functional DNA elements and not mistakes. You can look at orphan genes, for example. What is the reality? Humans are not apes, and they were created separately and uniquely in the image of God. Not only does the Bible prove this, but so does DNA evidence. Once again, the Bible is the history book of the universe. We read in Genesis 2:21 to 22, and the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman and brought her unto the man. We started with two people, one man and one woman. These are very significant statements about genetics. Modern genetics has discovered Adam and Eve, Noah's flood, the Tower of Babel, and it's written in the genome. The evidence for biblical creation is overwhelming. The Bible makes predictions. Looking at the Adam and Eve story in the biblical-based model, we can make numerous predictions. If we only started with 2 people, all the people today should have a low genetic diversity. If we started with 1 million people, you're going to have a lot of genes floating around a population of 1 million strong. But if you only started with 2 people, that really restricts the diversity today. Over deep time, any large population will accumulate enormous numbers of mutations, resulting in enormous amounts of genetic diversity. This is a serious problem for evolutionary theory. and those of opposing worldviews, because it is now clear that mankind has very limited genetic variation. This is predicted directly from the Bible, a literal interpretation of Genesis. While the observed low genetic diversity is a massive problem from the evolutionary perspective, this is most certainly expected and predicted from the biblical perspective. From the biblical model, we all come from just two people, Adam and Eve. This obviously means that limited diversity, it's easy to explain. The Bible has predicted this. If the Bible is correct and Adam really is our ancestor, as we just read from the Bible passage moments ago, there should only be one male ancestor of humanity. The small number of mutations that separate modern men from the sequence of Y chromosome Adam indicates that this man lived in the relatively recent past. Based upon the actual observed mutation rate for the human Y chromosome, studies show that Y chromosome Adam lived just thousands of years ago. And these findings are strong evidence supporting the literal Adam of the Bible. And that mitochondrial DNA, the little piece of DNA inherited exclusively from our mothers, that means we can build a family tree of all the females in the world, and there should only be one female ancestor of everyone on Earth today if Genesis is accurate. The small number of mutations that separate modern people from the sequence of mitochondrial Eve indicates that mitochondrial Eve lived in the recent past. For evolutionists and those of opposing worldviews, none of these facts have to be true. All genes should come in two versions since Eve was taken from Adam. We just read that in the passage moments ago. She probably got Adam's genome, except for the Y chromosome, of course. These biblical predictions are all exactly what we find in modern human genetics. What's the chance of the Bible being made up? And the biblical story mirrors what we actually see in human genetics today. Genesis 9:18-19. And the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem and Ham and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan. These are the three sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. The Bible, as I said before, is the history book of the universe. Further predictions based on the passage we just read. Look at Noah's flood. This story tells us that all people should be closely related. It tells us there should be only a few mitochondrial DNA lines as Shem, Ham, and Japheth's wives, and only one Y chromosome since it's only Noah. His three sons would have inherited his Y chromosome, and we should have significant evidence of rapid population growth. It turns out that this too is exactly what we find in modern genetics. This all did not have to be true. Even more predictions. The Tower of Babel account. We have found a single dispersal of all people in the relatively recent past, traveling in small people groups into uninhabited territory through the Middle East. They call it the Out of Africa story, but these are all biblical-based predictions. I want you to look at this tree. You can find this in the book Replacing Darwin and in the work of Dr. Nathaniel Jensen. This is several hundred human individuals. The tips of these branches represent human individuals. Distance of lines, the very long lines would be lots of DNA differences, and short lines would be almost none at all. What do you notice about this tree? This tree represents various people groups around the globe. Many of these lines come together as three major nodes. This is a fact that evolutionists even acknowledge. These are the three major haplogroups. How much longer do I have, James?
Got a minute, 20 seconds.
There are three major groupings and subgroupings. Length of lines connecting the groups are short, and lines radiating out from the groups are long. Reading scripture, we know our maternal ancestry goes back to Eve. Population would then grow and shrink to 8 at the time of the flood, and then grow again momentarily, ending with the splitting of people groups at the Tower of Babel. One Eve in the beginning. Population then shrinks to 8 people. Noah, Noah's wife, 3 sons, and 3 wives of Noah's sons. 3 boys get their mitochondrial DNA from mom, and then it ends. Genesis 9 says that these 3, the entire world was repopulated. We get our mitochondrial DNA from their 3 wives. The history of humanity is in our genome. What we know about mitochondrial DNA of humans fits the 6,000-year timescale, explains the 3 major haplogroups and the relative differences between pre- and post-flood humanity. We're making testable and falsifiable predictions. For example, the stamp, the tree that I just showed you, it contains the stamp of the history of civilization, the Roman Empire, Persian Empire, and Greeks. And this is just the start of the sorts of studies that are actually being done. Y chromosome, for example, disproves human evolution. It demonstrates Adam. The Y chromosome between humans and apes, it's far too different. We can look to the pre-existing heterozygosity model, pre-existing functional DNA differences, which also makes testable predictions on junk DNA, on what's functional, on what's not. Like I said, all evidence here demonstrates the truth of biblical creation. Maybe in the discussion period we can go into a little more details on this, but thanks so much, guys.
All right. So thank you very much for that as we go back to the dialogue boxes. And Jim, very excited for your opening statement as well. So with that, I'm going to set the timer for 8 minutes, and I will officially start the timer on your first word.
Okay. Sorry, I'm muted. Okay. So suppose you happen upon me on the street. You've never met me before, and I say, "Hey, can I have a minute of your time?" Say sure. And I pull this coin out of my pocket. I then tell you that I'm going to poof it from existence right in front of your very eyes. I tell you the only way that I can make it disappear is by saying the magic words as it's going into this little hole. I say, "Holy Shazama," and it's gone. It disappears. You can clearly see that it's no longer there. You can see my open palms, but no coin. You verify that, yes, it is gone. Wow. Then I proceed back into the same hole that you just watched, right? You're amazed. Oh my gosh, I pull it back out. This can't be right. Having just seen the coin disappear into my fist, it reappears and I pull it from my fist. Does this mean that you believe I used magic to make my coin disappear? Of course you don't. Even if you're not sure how I did it, you certainly don't concede that magic is real. Like that's not the first thing that you jump to. You might not know how I did it, but you know it's not magic. And it's not. It's misdirection. It's sleight of hand. It's the illusion that I give of the coin disappearing and then making it reappear just as amazingly, or not, depending on how amazed you are. But let's just say that I blew your mind standing for truth, and you are genuinely stumped. And now you have to question and reassess everything that you know about coins and physics and magic and myself, my own limitations as a fellow mortal, knowing what you know about humans. You begin to make excuses and being lenient with certain things, taking liberties that you normally wouldn't take, trying to harmonize magic with reality. Let's say later that you and James are talking about it and you're still in disbelief. You look at James with serious intent and you say, "James, that was magic. There's no other way to explain it." And knowing James, I think I know him pretty well. He'd say, no way, man. Like, look, I don't know how he did that dank coin trick, but I'm pretty sure that we could eventually come to understand how he did it. And Standing for Truth would snap back, say, "No, James, you don't understand. It's not a trick. It's magic, and I know it is. It's the only possible explanation is that Dank Jim Majors is a wizard of the dark arts." It sounds ridiculous, yet this is the exact position that he's taking tonight. It's the exact position being taken by those defending creationism. Standing for Truth and other creationists abuse the results and the efforts of modern science by attempting to use that science to prove that the universe was designed by an intelligent designer, specifically his intelligent designer. And he forces himself, or he is forced to operate and to attempt to understand everything within his own theological framework that he's fundamentally obligated himself to. He's obligated to say, "I don't understand how the universe got here, so this can be the only result. It's going to only be the result of my God expressing his divinity." And by making that commitment, Standing for Truth is convinced that science will not ever discover the process through which life originated unless it's his God. He's convinced that there is no other sufficient explanation than God. There's no biological mechanism. There's no cataclysmic chemical reaction in the past. There's no paleoanthropological discovery that would warrant him rejecting his claim that God did it. And people will tell him, Standing for Truth, I'm not so sure that you have a good reason to believe that God did this. Why are you so unwilling to test this belief? Why are you so unwilling to prod and make sure that it's true? Why don't you apply the same reasoning to this that you would apply to a magic trick? For those who are committed to the pursuit of truth, the gaps in the understanding of what we don't yet understand begin to close. You see both sides of it, and suddenly things become clear. Suddenly it's not what you thought it was. And by sincerely caring about whether or not what you believe is true, you allow yourself to analyze both sides instead of committing yourself to one side and damning the other one of all evidence, of all validity. You're honestly seeking out the answers, and that's what gets us the answers, is honestly seeking them out. But for standing for truth, by not putting his beliefs to the test, he can only see one side. For him and every other creationist, the only possible explanation for the missing coin is actual magic. And as you heard, standing for truth, he made an attempt at intellectually misleading everyone. You see, many people think that he made a very good argument for creationism. He's confident, he's rehearsed, he has a pleasant voice, and he doesn't really say anything that seems to contradict, prima facie. He really seems to know what he's talking about. But what evidence did he give for his God creating this universe? He didn't. He didn't give any, and he won't, because he can't. He will continue to engage in this intellectual misdirection, this intellectual sleight of hand. He has no testable hypotheses for the claim of creation, nor is he interested in proving it in a scientific manner. It's always the aim to first prove the existence of God, and everything else comes second, including evidence. And to say that God created the universe is not a scientific theory, nor is the proposition a framework that you can argue from. No, because the science that you use to make your arguments are a result of men and women before us refusing to be guided by theological presupposition, but by a desire to know what is true. He mentioned the. I only have 30 seconds left. I'm going to go ahead and save the rest of my time for later.
You bet. You bet. Thanks so much. Totally appreciate that opening statement as well. So with that, we will now go to the rebuttals. And as mentioned, this is kind of like a lightning pace. So take a deep breath. It's going to get pretty crazy. We have 4-minute rebuttals, and standing for truth, I've got the clock set. I will start it on your first word.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for that opening there, Jim. I got a few things written down. He talked about how it's magic, talked a little bit about analyzing both sides, talked about science. Well, science means to know. How do we know? We test, we observe, we retest, we demonstrate, we investigate, and everything we see, as I've shown in my opening presentation, lines up perfectly with a biblical-based model. And the biblical-based model, taking a literal interpretation of Genesis, what does it predict? I've already shown you a number of predictions there based on low genetic diversity, one Y chromosome ancestor, one mitochondrial DNA ancestor, the 3 major haplogroups, mitochondrial DNA haplogroups that point us right back to Noah's 3 sons and their lives. These all make testable, falsifiable predictions. I mean, we also predict death, degeneration, and extinction after the fall, of course. We would predict that we're going down and not up. We would predict, of course, based on our model of pre-existing heterozygosity, many changes would be seen, and they're due to mutation and natural selection, but they'd be based on adaptive degeneration. And that's actually exactly what we see: death, degeneration, and extinction. I mean, if you think of it this way, we've got a genome of 3 billion letters. If you take out one letter or change one letter randomly, are you going to have a huge fitness effect? Of course not. It's going to have a tiny fitness effect. And in fact, it's like rust on a car. I've said this many times before. It's like one single spelling mistake in a book the size of an encyclopedia. You can't see each spelling mistake. You can't see each rust event, but it's continuous and destructive. And Genesis records a time when people had extremely long lives, and that fits perfectly with what we know about genetics and genome genome degeneration. I mean, we're accumulating these low impact deleterious mutations. Take that back to a time of least genetic entropy. There's a time of creation, a time of perfection as recorded in the Bible. I mean, it brings me to think about Michael Behe in his new book, Darwin Devolves. He puts it perfectly. Darwinian evolution proceeds mainly by damaging or breaking genes, which counterintuitively sometimes help survival. In other words, the mechanism is powerfully devolutionary. It promotes the rapid loss of genetic information. Laboratory experiments, field research, and theoretical studies all forcefully indicate that as a result, random mutation and natural selection make evolution self-limiting. Darwin's mechanism works chiefly by squandering genetic information for short-term gain. Everything we see in this universe in genetics points us right back to biblical-based creation. So I'm using science. I'm looking at both sides, and you know what? You're not going to take your fish to fisherman by losing information. And everything we know about the change that we see based on mutations, natural selection, acting upon random variation, it fits perfectly from the starting point of a biblical-based assumption. And he talks a lot about magic and predictions, but what about abiogenesis? I mean, there's no evidence whatsoever of non-living chemicals evolving into life, into your first cell, and the genetic code in general is proof positive that if you think that all came about from, say, nothing or natural processes, well, at the end of the day, you're believing in magic yourself. That's why I always say evolutionists, they hope, they dream, they imagine that whales, pine trees, and carrots are all related through common ancestry, because that's magic, because it's contradictory to everything we know about empirical evidence. The genetic code, it has vital editing machinery, and that is itself encoded in the DNA. This shows that the system was fully functional from the beginning, and that's just another vicious circle of for evolution. So the genetic code that's almost universal to life on this earth is about the best possible for protecting against errors. Everything we see, like I said, it points us right back to a time of perfection, a time of creation. We see that in the universe with the law of increasing entropy. We see that in genetics with genetic entropy. And I've pointed to some testable predictions as well in regards to our model of created heterozygosity, because sure, it could be an ad hoc explanation that God encoded Adam and Eve and these created kinds with pre-existing functional DNA differences. But if I just ask you the question, did God intend his command, be fruitful and multiply, to be by cloning? And the answer to that is an obvious no. And what you've done here, okay, thanks, James.
Thanks for your patience on that. I hate cutting in on that, so sorry. Lost track of time in these lightning rounds. But we will now go to Jim Majors' rebuttal. So, Jim, I don't know if you were keeping time. If you were, I can give you the same amount of time that Standing for Truth went over, because I lost track of time there. So sorry about that.
I honestly wasn't keeping track of his time, but I'm good with whatever.
We'll give you like 4.5 minutes, if that works. So that's my guess. So sorry about
that. So using my opponent's own words in his opening statement, he doesn't get, I believe it's his first sentence. If it's not his first sentence, it's his second sentence. I don't want to misrepresent him, but he admits that he is starting with an assumption. And then he proceeds to use science. That's not how you use science. You don't start off with a goal, with something that you set out to prove and then set out to prove it. That is not scientific theory. That's not that's not a framework from which that you can argue from, because it's confining. And that's what's great about science, is that it's not confining. It's about discovery. It's not about containment. If you notice, he will do whatever he has to shoehorn 21st century science into his Bronze Age theological framework. He talks about the Y chromosomal atom and the mitochondrial Eve. He is right. The mitochondria can only be passed down through the female to another female, and the Y chromosome can only be passed down from a male to their son, and that's it. but what he doesn't seem to understand or know is, one, it's been verified that the mitochondrial Adam and Eve are hundreds of thousands of years old, hundreds of thousands of years back. And they coincide with what we believe to be the time that we emerged from Africa. There's a lot of similarities. What we also fails to mention is that not only are they hundreds of thousands of years old, but that they're tens of thousands of years old apart from each other. So not only were they not created, they didn't know each other, because the thing is about a mitochondrial Eve and a and a Y chromosomal Adam. They don't have to be the first one. If somebody's having children and a woman is passing down her, say my great aunt, okay, she's wanting to pass on her mitochondrial DNA. She has a daughter. She passes it on to her. Her daughter has 3 sons and dies. That mitochondrial DNA is dead. It stops with her. It does not go on. Therefore, it is not necessary for either the Y chromosomal Adam nor the mitochondrial Eve to be the first anything. And again, I will reiterate that he makes he sounds good. He's rehearsed his stuff. He knows his script. That's great. I'm glad he's sticking to it. But he has yet to provide evidence that one, creation is real, and 2, that it was his God that created this, and not one of the other creator gods that claim to have done it. How much time do I have left, James?
You've got 1 minute and 20 seconds.
Okay. I don't know. It's so clear that this is not the debate that I thought that I was coming to. He's coming at me with this, Ken Ham champ gorilla animal kingdom stuff that I haven't even made these assertions, but they're such strong debating points, because that is all they have to debate. They can't debate for, so they have to debate against. And with that, I'll give him the rest of my time. I'll succeed it to the Q&A.
You got it. Thanks so much. We appreciate it. And this next portion is exciting. This is actually my favorite part. This is where the debaters will have open dialogue for 20 minutes. So they can engage directly. They are uncaged. So I'll start the timer for 20 minutes. And thanks so much for your questions. We have a ton of questions, and they're awesome questions. So I really appreciate you guys asking them. And with that, the 20-minute timer is set. I guess whoever wants to lead is fine with me. You can take turns, I suppose.
Do you mind if I do, or do you want to? It doesn't matter to me.
Well, I mean, I got a few. Well, I want to say thanks for your rebuttal, keeping it respectful. It's up to you. I mean, I've got I know you talked about science.
Okay,
and
I'll ask you just a real quick question, and then and it doesn't really involve anything else, so you can segue right off that into whatever you want to get into.
No problem. Go ahead, brother.
Whenever you started out, if you don't mind, look back at your script, and I would like for you to tell me when you said that you started off with an assumption. Well, what is the assumption that you start off with?
Well, if we start off with the assumption that, say, the Bible is true and the Bible is the history book of the universe, we can make retrodictions, predictions,
Sure.
Testable predictions actually is what I'm making here as well. So if those are confirmed and those are consistent, say in regards to at least retrodictions, then that's pretty significant proof that, the Genesis story as found in the Bible should be taken literally. In a lot of your other religious books, you're not going to be able to make these accurate retrodictions and predictions. So if I started with the assumption that Genesis is true, but then I couldn't make accurate retrodictions, accurate predictions, that are falsifiable, well, then that's a very good sign that.
What predictions can you make?
Well, for example, we can make predictions based on the fact that Adam and Eve were created with pre-existing functional DNA differences. So it would be ad hoc if that didn't make any testable predictions. But of course, we would say that we'd expect those DNA differences that are encoded into Adam and Eve, into the created kinds, would be functional. Versus, say,
that's what we'd expect, but that's not prediction. What you're doing is you're describing it here. You're giving it body. just say that we didn't know. All right, say that we have all the knowledge that we do about mitochondrial DNA and everything else that you've talked about. What future predictions can you make?
Well, for example, that is a future prediction because I've talked to many evolutionists. They'll admit that, max functionality of the genome is maybe 20%, probably more like 10%. But what we actually now know is that at least 80% of, the non-coding DNA, we know that that's transcribed in RNA, which suggests function. And the trajectory of discovery favors genome-wide functionality, not just 20% like evolution.
Well, where in the Bible?
That is a prediction. That's a testable prediction, my man. Like,
okay, but,
how much
what I'm saying is who is predicting this? Because it's not the Bible. The Bible doesn't predict anything about DNA.
We're making a prediction based on the fact that God, his command to be fruitful and multiply, we're not saying that that was to be carried out by cloning. So if you acknowledge that very specific genetic view, the fact that, these design variants that God would have placed into Adam and Eve and the created kinds, we'd predict that those would be functional DNA differences. So we're predicting contradictory to the evolutionists that say max amount of genome functionality is 20%. We're saying that the vast majority of DNA is functional. And we're actually seeing that right now because contradictory to the evolutionary view, the non-coding DNA, it actually functions much like a computer. And it's
okay, but
regulatory functions. Yeah, go ahead.
But my point is that your presupposition is the only thing that is you have the presupposition, you have the means to get to your conclusion, and then you have the conclusion that you just got to, and none of those are in the Bible. Those are things that you use not the Bible for, but science for. You can make all those predictions without the Bible. I'm talking about predictions you can make with the Bible. We're talking about evidence for your God creating the universe.
Well, no, it's the Bible as recorded in Genesis that actually tells us that Adam and Eve were the first male and female in existence, and that God created these created kinds. And we can actually see that this is a prediction that flows naturally from Genesis. So if this is a prediction that is actually falsified, then yeah, that prediction based on that pre-existing heterozygosity, that would be false. I'm telling you, you can go in the lab, you can do whatever you have, because you know what, we understand very little of the DNA language, probably less than 5% since comprehensive knockout experiments on humans. Fortunately, it's unethical. They've yet to be performed. So for any evolutionists to say, max 20% functionality, that's premature to make that claim. And we're actually putting it on paper that, this is a prediction, genome-wide functionality.
Okay.
And so far that's
predicting this.
Well, intelligent design advocates have always predicted that. For example, these pseudogenes are now known to be DNA functional elements. ERVs, endogenous retroviruses, are now known to be functional in the placenta and the embryo.
So what you're saying is the Bible isn't doing this. It's you have prophets. Is that what you're saying? They prophesied this?
No. This wasn't a prophecy. I'm talking about intelligent design advocates, proponents, scientists. They've always said, why would we create like a car that's 80% junk? So obviously, if we're created by God and then we're making the hypothesis that Adam and Eve, based on the Bible and God's command to be fruitful and multiply, was not to be carried out by cloning, we'd expect these functional DNA differences, and that's actually what we're seeing. So they're not these evolutionary leftovers, these genomic fossils.
Okay, well, you know what? And that's not my claim. Like, you're sitting here, you're wanting to apparently argue an evolutionist. That's apparently what you came here for. I'm not arguing for evolution. I'm arguing against creationism. And you have still yet to provide evidence for it, because none of the claims that you made about genetic entropy or any of this stuff has anything to do with creationism or the Bible or your God. And I'm honest.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Of course, if the Bible records a time of extremely long lives, we would expect that. Looking at our lives now, looking at the accumulating mutation-related diseases, we see it. It's entropic degeneration on all levels, and we actually see that these low-impact deleterious mutations are degenerating us, and we see that Genesis records a time of increased longevity. That's a direct prediction from Genesis. How else do you explain that?
No, it's not, because first of all, the people who Genesis is writing about, it isn't even proposed to be. It's not even written around the time these people were proposed to have lived. So there's that. Secondly,
I don't want you to slap and run. I don't want you to slap and run. The Bible clearly records the ages, and then we see a significant drop-off. It's a decay curve, the exact same decay curve we see based on this accumulating damage by low-impact intelligence mutation. I mean, you can deny science all you want.
You're right. You're right.
Point of least genetic.
You do see a dive-off. You see Methuselah living
to Genesis.
Right, you see Methuselah living that long. You see Moses living, or Noah living that long. In fact, he was like 600 before he started building a boat. Abraham. I mean, all these.
Which makes sense, right? Because we've accumulated these genetic mistakes, these degenerate,
and you start dropping off, right? Sense. Right. Okay. So it's really funny that the low point of that is right around the time that we start having verifiable evidence of life expectancy, because life expectancy has done nothing but go up.
Well, no. That's
yes.
The average lifespan has gone up based on medical intervention, but the maximum lifespan, come on, man, that has not gone up. That will not go up. And we see entropic degeneration on all levels, increased rates of cancer, autism, immunological diseases. It's ever. You have to be a science denialist to stay. And you see that the ages have dropped off post-flood. You see that actually in Leviticus, that's when Moses put in the law that you can't marry close relatives, because we know those shared genetic mistakes, marrying close relatives, well, that's going to expose the hidden reservoir of genetic mistakes, but they didn't have that pre-flood. They didn't have that.
Can you demonstrate anybody in the past 1,000 years, in the past 2,000 years, in it's reported by a historian, whatever, that is said, or that whose lifespan exceeds that of today?
Well, I mean, we have thousands and thousands of legends of the golden age where people were said to have lived to 900, 800, 1,000. We see it recorded in the Bible. That's a historical record.
It is recorded in the Bible. It is recorded in the Bible, and when it is recorded, it is not recorded at a time that these people were to have lived.
See, the thing is, we're making predictions and retrodictions right from I want to mention something which you said about Y, because I'm glad that you actually addressed the Y chromosomal atom. So you obviously see if that's true, Y chromosomal atom, mitochondrial Eve, if that's true, you're saying that they're separated, they're thousands and thousands of years ago. But how do you explain, based on the observed mutation rate of, let's just say, the human Y chromosome? Okay. The fact that there's so little mutations and such low genetic diversity between any two humans, max 0.5% different, and that's why the evolutionists have to resort to a bottleneck. So how do you explain that?
There isn't much genetic diversity because we stay to ourselves. I mean, we marry within our own cultures. In fact, in places that we see the most genetic diversity are the places where they have outsiders coming in, where they're actually expanding the gene pool, so to speak.
But the small number of mutations that separate modern men from the sequence of Y chromosome atom, that actually indicates that this man lived in the relatively recent past. You said thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago. So how do you reconcile that without invoking something like a near extinction event?
Because I am not operating on your presupposition that there is genetic entropy, that it's just this perpetual entropy to where we're just like dwindling down to nothing. Like what you understand genetical entropy to be, and what genetical entropy really are two totally different things. Like genetical entropy are things like aging and Alzheimer's and miscarriages and speech impediments. I mean, there's so many, but what it is, what genetic entropy.
No. I just want to correct you there real quick before you go on too long. What genetic entropy is the fact that most mutations, they're nearly neutral. So they're unselectable, they're invisible to natural selection. So they accumulate very small effects, and then they accumulate relentlessly. So natural selection, which I'm sure you're aware of, that's going to amplify the best beneficial mutations and get rid of the worst detrimental mutations. But at the end of the day, it can't do anything against the invisible damage caused by near neutral, low impact mutations. So how are you going to solve that degeneration problem if those mutations build up? 100 per person per generation. That's 700 billion new mutations, unselectable this generation alone. So what type of mechanism, what type of selection are you going to use to resolve that that problem there, Jim.
What math are you using to come to that? How are you verifying that there's, what did you say, 7 million mutations?
Well, I'm saying that it's widely recognized. You can just Google it.
It's recognized?
It's recognized by the evolutionary community that we inherit 100 new mutations per person per generation.
I'm talking about passing them on, because there's one thing about inheriting a gene that may have not been how would you call it? I'm not a geneticist. I guess activated, so to speak.
I understand what you're saying, but I mean, are you disagreeing with the? I mean, we begin to add new mutations to, say, our genetic load at the first division of our zygote, and I think it's approximately 3 new mutations every cell division throughout our lifetime. But it's just 100 mutations through our reproductive lines, through our reproductive cells, because your somatic mutations, they're not going to be passed on, say, from your skin cells, for example. I mean, we actually die due primarily to mutation accumulation, but it's the 100 mutations per person per generation that we accumulate. So like my children, they're going to have 100 more mistakes than I have, and my children's children, they're going to have 200 approximately more mistakes than I have. So those mutations are pouring into the population. How do you resolve that? That's perfectly consistent with Genesis.
But no, it's not consistent with Genesis, because Genesis doesn't make that claim. But what I'm saying is, though, Genesis does the same thing about genetic entropy. Like, you are making that.
Are you saying that the Bible doesn't say that the entire creation grows?
You just talked for like a minute straight.
Well, I just don't want you to slap and run, because the Bible does say after the fall, we have now experienced death. By one man, death was brought into the world. Death, extinction. Go ahead.
I just want to make sure that I totally understand that you have to be able to give answers to the objections, because you're defending that you're the only one defending of you, but just to get a little bit more time from Jim in terms of.
But I want to apologize. I'm just saying, because if my direct predictions and retrodictions are coming from Genesis, and he's saying Genesis doesn't say that, obviously we know after the fall, death was brought into the world by one man, Adam. So just wanted to correct you on that, but go ahead. I won't interrupt.
No, and to me, like, that's not something that I have to account for. It's not something that I have to explain, because I'm perfectly happy with letting scientists and geneticists further map the genomes and further map these Y chromosomes and further understand these and to be able to sample them more and discover these different mutations, because only by discovering these mutations can we rearrange the family tree. Can we see what that Y chromosome Adam was and where he came from and how we all fit into this. Like, only by doing genetic research can we do that. And there's no genetic research in the Old Testament, bottom line.
Well, yeah, we are, for example, there are, like, for example, population geneticists, they widely recognize that human mutation is catastrophic and that man is presently degenerating. They've come up with, mechanisms, say synergistic epistasis, mutation count mechanism, to attempt to solve the problem. It was an evolutionary population geneticist by the name of Alexei Kondrashov. He actually said, why are we not extinct 100 times over? Because he's recognizing that this accumulation of low impact deleterious mutations, it is a problem, and genomes are devolving and the genome is rusting out like a car. And I know you're not here to defend evolution, but you know what, these evolutionists say we started off as a single-celled organism, multi-celled organism, fish.
Right. And that's the thing, though. Like, I'm not here to defend evolutionism, and you're not here to argue against it. You're here to argue for the creation of the universe.
Which I am. I agree with what you're saying. I'm just saying it's a double whammy. It demonstrates biblical creation, a literal interpretation in Genesis, and it destroys pond scum to people evolution. That's why I love it. It's evolutions. It happens in the imagination of those who want to believe in it. And at the end of the day, all the evidence points right back to a time of creation, a time of perfection. It's devolution, not evolution. That's what we.
Sure, it does. Going off of your first sentence of your opening statement, if you're operating from a presupposition, because if you're not operating from the Bible, you can look at many texts and you can read genetics, you can read whatever you want into text. As a matter of fact, the older the text, the better. It's a lot easier to read BS into a literary device. The Old Testament's really good at that. You can make it seem whatever you want, and that's why there are young Earth creationists. That's why there are old Earth creationists. That's why nobody can make their mind up, because people read into it what they want to read into it.
Okay, let me ask you a question then. Okay, so at least you agree, you think, yeah, obviously you've said that it was written afterwards and all this, but at least we agree the Bible does record a time when people had extremely long lives. Okay, so let's stay there. Now, if there were initially, say, no mutation, let's say theoretically, hypothetically, you know, just kind of work with me. Let's just say there were initially no mutations. Wouldn't you expect, Jim, just be honest with yourself, be honest with the evidence, wouldn't you expect the maximal human age to be much longer? Doesn't that just make logical sense, just hypothetically?
No, it doesn't.
Oh, okay. So if we die primarily due to mutation accumulation, we see there's entropic degeneration on all levels. Thousands and thousands of new mutations, related diseases are added to the database every year. Obviously, if you take that back to a point of least genetic entropy, that makes complete sense. And the Bible report, I mean, if you're just going to say no to that, then there's nothing more than I can say in regards to that. But if you actually look at the Bible,
but there's not, because I have no frame of reference. Like you're asking me to just presume that these people really were this old, when all evidence that we have from all of written history, like we know that people don't live to be that old. As a matter of fact, it's pretty common knowledge that the farther you go back, the shorter people's lives were.
Well, actually, well, for one, I've already said there's thousands of legends of the Golden Age. Okay.
I'm sorry, was that legends?
Everything you see in the fossil record, everything was bigger. Everything. I mean, look at the megalodon shark; it was massive. Look at kangaroos; were huge. Dinosaurs. Everything just points to the fact that we are living in a fallen, degenerate world. Just look at life around us. Look at it. The thing is, if you actually look at, let's say when the lifespan of early, you know, biblical characters and their ages are compared in the Bible, since I'm defending the Bible data, even if you don't agree with it, it clearly reveals, you can actually plot a graph with all the ages and the decline. It does reveal an exponential. And that curve can only be described as biological. I don't know any other.
No, it can't. No, look, entropy is natural. It is natural. I mean, one day our sun is going to implode. One day our sun is going to implode upon itself. At one point, this Earth couldn't survive because it was too hot, and one day it won't be able to survive because it's too cold. And if you're taking the Genesis account literally, I mean, you know, how did plants survive without water when when plants were here the day before water? How did they grow? You know, I mean, we could go into that petty stuff.
Okay, well, if you want to, okay, so you were talking about testable and falsifiable predictions. So I've given you a few based on genetics. If you want to go into, say, for example, say the flood. Okay, so if we're going to look at all the layers, the fossil record, I mean, we can even make testable predictions based on the global flood that's actually been confirmed.
Can we touch on the example that I made?
What's the example you made? Are you talking about plants on?
We're at.
Are you saying at 20? What's that, James?
Actually, time. So we've hit the 20-minute mark. If you guys want to keep talking more, like we can. Otherwise, we'll go into closings.
Well, I want time for the Q&A as well. What's the next conclusion?
That's fine. We'll just go into Q&A.
Or is it a concluding statement?
Still have a concluding statement period from each of you for 5 minutes. I was just asking if you wanted to go longer on the discussion, because I know that it's like I hate stopping it, but I understand that if you guys are ready for the closings, we can go to that too.
No, that's all right.
You got it.
We can go ahead and go into the closings. I think I can wrap mine into it.
All right. We will have Standing for Truth. Given that he had started, we'll have him start the closings, and then Jim will have the last word in the closings. So, Standing for Truth, I will set the timer for 5 minutes, and I will officially start it when you start speaking.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, James. You know what? At the beginning of my presentation, I put forth testable hypotheses on, you know, the three major haplogroups: mitochondrial DNA, low genetic diversity, for example. The evolutionary community, they resort to, you know, a bottleneck of a near extinction event of 10,000 people to explain the low genetic diversity. It's rescue device after rescue device, but the retrodictions and predictions flow perfectly. They flow beautifully from a literal interpretation of Genesis. And we can even look at the flood. That's kind of what I wanted to go in there. We stuck to genetics, you know, time flew by. That's awesome. But there's plenty of evidence that the earth was once underwater. We see marine fossils on mountains. and in landlocked areas far from the sea. Actually, no one's disputing that. And some of these sedimentary rock layers, they actually extend, and Jim might be aware of this, they extend over entire continents or even farther. And the deposition of those layers, they had to have been catastrophic. And we actually looked to a model called catastrophic plate tectonics, which makes testable predictions. That's what I was about to go in there. But these catastrophic episodes from the deposition that we see, it was necessary, or else there wouldn't have been much fossilization. I mean, we see fossils, animals giving birth, fish being eaten. Everything we see in the fossil records suggests sudden and rapid burial. This is just more evidence outside of genetics that confirms a biblical-based model. The debate is there evidence for creation, biblical creation? There's a ton of evidence: geology, astronomy, genetics. I'm making testable predictions. All the observations we see in fossils and geology, they're in accord with the flood of Noah, covering the entire earth just a few thousands of years ago. And the existence of fossils, as I'm talking about here, is proof that it happened quickly, because environmental factors prevent that organism from forming. But if it's covered by sediment and then protected, the fossilization process can start. And we've seen rapidly formed sedimentary layers in canyons at Mount St. Helens, a real-time example. And that's just small scale catastrophe. Imagine the global flood. The scope and scale of the energy produced by the flood is recorded in Genesis. I mean, so many retrodictions and predictions based off Genesis. It's amazing. It's astounding. Think about it. The fountains of the great deep break open is recorded in Genesis. Earth is fractured like an eggshell. The continents are moving vertically, horizontally. Tsunamis drive floodwaters onto the continents. Rain is unending. Geologic catastrophes. And continents are moving at rapid paces through the floodwaters. So according to the catastrophic plate tectonics model that we put forth, the pre-flood ocean crust, it's dragged down into the mantle core. That's called subduction process. This is what I was going to go into with Jim here. The cold ocean crust should still be cold, of course, since this occurred only thousands of years ago, even though it has descended into the deep, hot mantle. And believe it or not, and astoundingly, seismic data from NASA has actually revealed enormous slabs of cool rock under North America, and down in the core itself, which should be warm, is confirmation of flood geology. And I can go on and on and on about evidence in genetics, in geology, in flood geology. There's even been rapid magnetic reversals observed, confirmation of the flood. I mean, the contorted rocks we see, they indicate fast folding of soft sediments. And the plate tectonics I'm talking about, the catastrophic plate tectonics, slow and gradual uniformitarian processes can't explain what we actually see. All the geologic evidence suggests rapid plate tectonics. And the global flood with the vast and unique consequences can easily explain coal, oil, and it doesn't have to be due to millions of years. In fact, they can be formed in months. How much time do I have there, James?
We've only got 47 seconds left.
I mean, there's just thanks, James. There's just so much evidence that appears to be a consequence of a sudden, unrepeatable event, a global flood whose waters erupted from interconnected worldwide subterranean chambers with an energy release exceeding the explosion of 300 trillion hydrogen bombs. I mean, just picture that. It's evidence upon evidence upon evidence. Genome-wide degradation is perfectly consistent with Genesis. All modern scientific evidence points to the decay and destruction of an originally perfect design creation. If you're an evolutionist and you have to hope, dream, and imagine that you're going to take your fish to fisherman by losing information, I would refer you back to the quote from Michael Behe from Darwin Devolves in my first rebuttal. I mean, that's all we see. Death, degeneration, and destruction, all expected and predicted after the fall of man, after the fall of Adam. So thanks so much. I'd love to see Jim, come to Jesus. Salvation's easy by faith alone. Seems like a good guy, nice guy. We've had a good conversation. 20 minutes flew by. Great debate, actually. Thanks for inviting me there, James.
You got it. Thanks so much for that closing. And now we will jump over to Jim. So, Jim, I've got the timer set for 5 minutes, and I will start on your first words.
Thank you, Standing for Truth, for those kind words. I appreciate that. I appreciate your amiability during this debate. I'll just touch on what I was going to touch on. I mean, there's, gosh, I could start anywhere, but since we're talking about creation, I mean, he's got to be aware that one, there are multiple, there are two different creation stories matched into one in Genesis. There's two different sources. You've got Genesis 1 that starts off calling God Elohim in the very first freaking verse, you know, and then you have Genesis 2, you know, and it's using the Yahweh, and it's and there's conflicting accounts as well, you know. If the land was filled with plants and trees on day 3, then how did they survive if the sun wasn't created until day 4? That doesn't make sense. Especially, I mean, if he takes it literally, then he means a literal 6-day creation, and I'm not sure that he's aware of what that implies. Did God just make an old earth, an earth with the appearance of looking old? Was it nice and shiny when Adam and Eve got here, and then they just jacked it all up? Like, just I don't know what happened there, but it's I mean, if plants did exist before the sun, for one, and you're on the 1,000-year per day or whatever time scale, I don't know if you know what happens when there's no sun, but it gets pretty cold. I'd feel safe saying it's probably gets pretty close to absolute zero. And as far as the claim about the age of the people, I mean, there's been no skeleton that we've gotten from Ethiopia, from Europe, from anywhere in Africa. As a matter of fact, it wasn't until about 30,000 years ago that people started living past the age 30. You know, and it's verifiable. We can go back 100,000 years plus. I feel comfortable saying 150,000 years. And seeing it go back that far, much farther than I'm sure that my interlocutor believes that the Earth actually is, and I mean it's just a really, really ridiculous claim. And that with that, I'll put the rest of the time towards the Q&A. Thank you again.
You got it. Thank you so much. And we have a lot of excellent questions, so we will try to fly through these as much as we can, and we also only have 20 minutes, and so I'm really sorry with that, but just to respect the debaters' time, we're going to...
you're not hurting my feelings any if you want to go far longer.
You bet. I think that Standing for Truth has a date tonight, and so I don't want to take time away from that. I just made that up. I don't know what it is, but I do know that Standing for Truth mentioned before that you have to
Yeah, I know it's not a date. Come on.
I have no friends. My own wife doesn't want to hang out with me. No, I'm just kidding. No, I think the 15 to 20 minutes we agreed on, roughly questions. If it goes a little bit longer, that's fine.
Okay, cool.
Cool.
As long as it's okay with you, James.
Yeah, that's okay if we go like maybe whatever you guys are both okay with, but I also want to, I know that you guys are polite, so you might
How about until the questions start sucking?
That's funny. All right, we'll start up. So thanks so much for everybody's questions. Great questions. The Holy Spackle, thanks for your super chat. We'll go through the super chats first. They said, can you give your shave with a straight razor? I think that's for Jim.
Yes, I can. I do shave with a straight razor.
Wow, impressive. Ronald Ndonka, thanks for your super chat. Yes, for James, modern day debate, do you believe God used evolution in his creation? That's a great question. I'll try to be quick. It seems that it's inevitable that there's some degree of evolution, even for a young earth creationist, with the diversity we would need since the animals would get off the ark to get all the diversity we have today. It seems like even young earthers need some sort of accelerated evolution. So even though I'm not a young earther, I'm kind of agnostic on origins, but I would say that it seems that both sides need to adhere or accept the idea that allele frequencies can change in a population over time. So using that definition, I definitely would be, and that's what Jackson Wheat taught me the definition is a long time ago. So thanks for that, Jackson.
I am not a hipster. I know they didn't say at modern day debate, but I just got to say that right now. I will fight somebody.
Did someone say you're a hipster? Oh
yeah, no, I'm a real farmer. Okay, I'm not a wannabe farmer.
You've got the most hipster glasses I've ever seen, though. Okay, so next one. Thanks so much for that. Ted at Philosophy, thanks for your super chat. He said, "Standing, will you debate Aaron?" So I think he's referring to Aaron Ra, your rival.
Aaron Ra, my rival. Yeah, of course. I've been stating that I would debate him for a while now. I know even the Film Freeze had an outstanding debate challenge to him. As long as it's an agreed upon structure. I mean, it could even be the same type of structure we had here with Jim here. It can be a couple openings, couple rebuttals, discussion portion. I just want an agreed upon structure and format. I'd prefer it here on Modern Day Debate. I love supporting you, James. Great channel. You're putting out some awesome stuff. I've debated on here, 10 times I think it's been, and I've never had any complaints. So if Aaron Ra wants to debate, let's set it up here on Modern Day Debate and agree to a structure. I think that would be a blast. I think it'd be a good turnout too. It'd be fun for everybody.
Gotcha. We will next up go to, thanks for that super chat, by the way, CI Lobotomy LLC. Thanks for your super chat. They said young Earth creationists are just flirfs with more friends. I don't know what a flirf is, but it doesn't sound good. Standing for Truth. What have you got to say to that?
Repeat that.
They said young Earth creationists are just flirfs with more friends. I think it's something to do with flat Earth. Am I right or am I wrong?
Flat Earth. Well, I mean, I don't see flat earthers making testable hypotheses like young Earth creationists are. And I think I'm definitely not a flat earther, by any means. But I think believing that pine trees, whales, carrots, and say T-Rex are related through common ancestry probably takes as much imagination as one who believes in flat Earth.
Yeah, I gotta agree. I think it's the other way around. I think flurfers are just young Earth creationists who don't travel.
I want to see a map from a flat earther. That's all I'm asking for is a map. I'm curious.
Oh, it's entertaining if you haven't seen one. They sell them. As a matter of fact, I bought one. I have one somewhere.
I'd hang that up.
It's just a circle, and it's got like the North Pole in the center, and then it has the South Pole. It's the ring around the edge of the ice wall.
Next up, thanks for that. And we have, you better put it on camera next time, Jim. I hope you do.
I'll put it behind me.
Sigifredo Sarabia, thanks for your super chat. They said, if evolution is false and the Bible is true, how old would the world and universe have to be versus rock and fossil dating not going away from Gospels?
So I'm guessing that is a question for me.
Yes, I think so.
I mean, I think based on what we know about mutations are the destroyer and not the creator like evolutionists, want it to be. So you can give the evolutionists trillions and trillions and trillions of years. I kind of like how Frank Turek, he's an old earther, but he rejects, that type of pawns come to people evolution. And even he says trillions of years, you're not going to take your single-celled organism to a well because at the end of the day, all we see is degeneration on a genomic level. So evolution to be false, that type of large-scale evolution, I mean, it can be false in an old Earth. But I think based on what we know about accumulating low-impact deleterious mutations, just like Alexei Kondrashov said, an evolutionary population geneticist, why are we not extinct 100 times over? That proves a young genome, and you could probably directly prove a young Earth from that. Thanks, James.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. Next, we have Sigifredo Sarabia. Thanks for your second super chat. They said, if evolution is true, so flip it. If evolution is true and the Bible is false, who came first, male or female, and what quote-unquote sex did that genome mate with?
That's the thing though about evolution. It's a Homo abiogenesis. I'm gonna mess it up. It's the latest classification that's widely recognized as as our ancestor. It's not something that just happens. And Astrolo. whatever it is. I suck at this. I'm sorry, guys. But they didn't give birth to a Homo anything. You know what I mean? Like they didn't just change genus like that. They didn't just pop out and just be like, oh well, this is weird. You know, it was just a it's like the analogy. You know, if you take 10 miles of blacktop and you start with a 1-inch paintbrush and you paint a blue line, and with each brush stroke you add 1 drop of red until you get to the end and it's red. You know, where along there do you say that it stops becoming blue and starts becoming red? Like, where do you draw the line? You know what I mean? Like that's what evolution is. We're talking about changes over a very, very long time, unfathomable amounts of time. Like you think Jesus was a long time ago, 2,000 years? You know, we've been around 50 times the amount between us and Jesus, at least, easy.
Gotcha. Thanks so much.
Actually, if I could just say one quick thing,
Well, they had
I
one
think
more
that's
question.
why I always.
They had one more question. They had one more question.
For super chats?
Yep. And this was.
I just wanted to respond to that one. I'm not saying we're ending the question and answer, but
no, I mean
go ahead.
that person's super chat had a question within it that I didn't get to finish before Jim started.
Question
answering.
within a question. Okay, I get it. Go ahead.
So they said, when did the opposite sex exist? I think they mean like if the first sex pops up, like maybe how long after did the second one pop up?
Well, I mean, what happened, you know, is you had natural selection. People would, well, I mean, at this time, you know, they were choosing mates. You know, we see it in the animal kingdom, they choose mates that would benefit them. They're strong, they can provide for them, whatever. And in this case, they're likely smarter. They could use tools. They could maybe they could run faster. Maybe they could provide them shelter. And they who knows? Maybe he had fire. Maybe he's like, hey, what's up, baby? Like I got that hot stuff, you know. And the other guy's like, I can't make fire. I don't know how it was, but it's just something between mate attraction and natural selection, basically.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. Next up, the Standing for Truth. If Jim's okay with it, I'm okay with you responding.
Oh yeah, go ahead, bro.
Yeah, just real quick. I think just based on his response, and I appreciate the response. I just, that's why I always say, time is the hero of the story for the evolutionists. Time is the god of the science fiction based religion known as, pond scum to people evolution, because they imagine that all these small scale variations, they're actually, eventually going to add up to make something we don't observe. So it's not observable. It's not repeatable. Like, for example, if I told you that Mary Poppins could fly quickly through the air with her umbrella, you'd say that's a fairy tale, of course. But if I told you Mary Poppins could fly slowly through the air with her umbrella, you'd say that's not a fairy tale. I mean, they're both fairy tales. I mean, you can have as much time as you want. It's not going to take your fish.
Just real quick, you know that you can't observe you can't observe macroevolution in real time because it takes so long. We're talking about
exactly time.
Like because we're saying, like, I'm not going, like, nothing about me is going to evolve. Nothing about me is going to change except I'm going to get older. I'm going to get uglier and I'm going to die. But like, there's nothing about me that's going to evolve in the sense that we know that it is. But my ancestors, my children's children, my children's children, somewhere along the line there will be an observable change that will be because of something that I contributed to, and they will be something different than what I am. And we can look at that in our ancestors just back in Jesus' time. Look how much shorter they were. I mean, yeah, but there's so many. I mean,
okay. Let me just ask you then. Do you have parents?
You just got a quick
no,
just to get to as many questions.
yeah, I do.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. We could probably go on forever.
I hate to cut you off. Sorry about that. Next up, thanks so much for that. And Ronald Midnaka, thanks for your super chat. He said, Standing, how do you explain these evolution-believing Christians? Francis Collins, Tim Keller, John Walton, and N.T. Wright, among many others.
Heresy. They're heretics.
I meant to say it was for Standing because I said it was for Jim.
Yeah, I was answering for him.
Okay, can you repeat that, James? I thought it was for Jim.
Oh, sorry about that. I totally, like, Freudian slip or something. I don't know. Ronald Madonka, thanks for your super chat. He asked, how do you explain these evolution-believing Christians? such as Francis Collins, Tim Keller, John Walton, and N.T. Wright, among many others.
Well, I think they're just adopting a secondary religion of, say, bacteriobiologist type evolution. They're starting from, that belief that universal common ancestry is true, and then they're force fitting it into the clear text of the Bible, of Genesis. So, I mean, for one, the theology of theistic evolutionism, I think it's weak. It doesn't flow. When you take it literally as it is, and you read it according to that, and like I've shown before, I mean, you can make retrodictions and predictions from a literal interpretation of Genesis. Biologos, one of their top scientists, Francis Collins, I think he headed Biologos and the ENCODE project. But you can watch a debate between Dr. Nathaniel Jensen and one of their top scientists, Dr. Dennis Venema. So they go at it for 4 hours. If you really want to come to a good conclusion and watch that debate objectively, I'd certainly recommend it. Thanks, James.
Gotcha. Thank you. I appreciate it. Next, we have another one from Brian G. Thanks for your super chat, Brian. He says, how do you account for the scientist, Dr. Mary Schweitzer, who is a Christian, who totally repudiates young Earth creationism? Also, she's the one who discovered fossilized soft tissue in dino bones.
Right. So from what I understand, I don't think she ever was a young Earth a young Earth creationist by any means. She's the one who discovered that, and I know that there's lots of reading material you can read about that, papers, books, articles. They're coming up with different mechanisms to explain the soft tissue found in dinosaur fossils, and a lot of it is based on storytelling, hypothesizing, but she's obviously holding on to that primary axiom. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's true. If she was never a young Earth creationist, I'm not surprised that she's still holding on to her basic worldview.
Gotcha. Next up, the Holy Spackle. Thanks for your super chat. They said evidence, death after fall, timeline, and evidence. I think they're asking for evidence of the death.
For what?
Are they asking for evidence of genetic entropy?
I think that they're asking for evidence of the cause of genetic entropy.
Well, the cause of genetic entropy would be the accumulation of the invisible, the unselectables, the near neutral, low impact, deleterious mutations. And the thing is, we see even, so-called beneficial mutations, the best beneficial mutations, the stronger proponent of evolution can give you, they're all, loss of information, loss of, say, net specificity, even gene duplications, which they will say is their primary mechanism for, that large scale evolution. Those are universally deleterious. And even if you give them, I always say, listen, we don't have to argue all day on a beneficial mutation that adds novel information to the genome. I'll give you 2, I'll give you 3. But 2 or 3, rare beneficial mutations, whether it's a point mutation, duplication, it's not going to offset the many accumulating deleterious duplications, let alone all the other accumulating mutations. It's like rust on a car. It's continuous. It's destructive.
But do you think that God created Adam and the people in the Golden Age with all of these to be able to live that long age, and then he just shut them off, like he basically had a
No, that's a good that's a good question. Well, I mean, based on the created heterozygosity hypothesis, God encoded these pre-existing functional DNA differences in Adam and Eve, the created kind. So there wouldn't have been any mutations. But after the fall, God removed his sustaining power and allowed, say, things like the second law of thermodynamics, law of increasing entropy, genetic.
But he created it, though.
Because he removed his sustaining power. It was a natural.
But he created them with it, and he protected it. So basically, he had it installed in them. It's basically like a self-destruct bomb inside of an AI robot, just in case it goes crazy.
They did.
What's nice is you see a lot of redundancy in the genome with backup code. It's almost like through his foreknowledge, based on the fact that he knew he'd fall. Actually, put forth a way where we're not just going to degenerate in one generation, but it is the slow degeneration.
What they just clarified, they said he claims death doesn't happen before Adam and Eve's fall. What's the timeline? I think they mean like what's the timeline of when death did come in.
The timeline, so either he's wondering when will we go as a species extinct, or how long until death was brought into the world before the fall? Is that the question?
I'll read the original super chat and then their addition, and you might be able to put the pieces together. They said evidence death after fall, and then they said timeline and evidence, and then they said he claims death doesn't happen before Adam and Eve's fall. What's the timeline?
So, well, we know we can see that there's death in the universe. We can see that Genesis, if we take Genesis literally, and then we build our model from that, we can see that it records a time where people live to extremely long lives, a time before death, when they're in the garden. So I can't point you historically or observably. I mean, that's the past. We'll have to watch it on a big screen when we die and go to heaven. But as far as today, I mean, we see entropic degeneration on all levels. I think logically you can take that back to a point of least entropy, and that's why at the end of the day our hope is in Christ, because there's nothing fun, there's nothing good or exciting about genetic entropy. There's nothing funny about the increased rates in Alzheimer's, dementia, asthma, autoimmune diseases, horrible cancers. What is it, 1 in 3 now? Immunological diseases. Nothing fun. That's why our hope is in Christ. And you know what? Genetic entropy, it points us to Christ, and it points us to the necessity of a Savior. We're in a dying world, and we need Jesus to save us from that.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. Then we have Sigifredo Sarabia. He said, if there was no death before Adam, how do you explain mammoths of 10,000 years with structures at similar dates? How did things not die if it's necessary?
Well, it's funny because I have a paper that I've studied where it talks about mammoth populations. They were actually highly inbred, and they carried a very elevated genetic load, which they say likely contributed to their extinction due to this mutational meltdown. So you can actually see plenty of paleogenomic evidence of genetic entropy, even the claimed examples of human evolution, Homo erectus, Homo neanderthal, Homo naledi, all suffered from, what's called reductive evolution. Like, let's say Homo naledi, for example, is a praised example. That reductive evolution, that inbreeding, that went on. And I always say inbreeding, it's like a sneak preview to where we're going as a species genetically. But you see these pathologies, reduced body size, reduced brain volume. And then the dating of it, 10,000 years based on unknowable, impossible assumptions. But I actually love to use mammoths as evidence for genetic entropy. So I think I enjoyed that question because that's proof of, yeah. Thanks, James.
You bet. Thanks so much. Sigifredo Sarabia, thanks for your super chat here as well. They said, if Darwin's title on the origin of species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in struggle for life, is it racist?
I'm guessing that one's for Jim?
I think so. They had said...
Can you repeat it? I'm sorry.
They said, if Darwin's title of the origin of species is on the origin of species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life, is it racist?
Yeah, of course it's racist.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Well, I mean, it at least has racist implications.
You got it. Thanks so much. And next question. Thanks for that, Sigifredo Sarabia. Farouk Assad, thanks for your super chat. They said, how did plants survive before the sun was here?
Okay, so that was the question that Jim was trying to ask at the end there. So so if you actually look in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and then he said, "Let there be light." Well, I mean, he could easily sustain that with his light. And the thing is, the sun creating on another day makes sense because a lot of religions, a lot of cultures, ancient civilizations, they worship the sun. So the way that it's laid out in Genesis is actually perfect because it shows us that we shouldn't be worshiping the sun, and that's why he sustained life, plants, whatever, with his light. And we can actually see that the sun and the moon are removed in the new heaven and the new earth, and we're once again sustained by his light. So I think that's a pretty, I think plants, I don't think they even, I'm not an expert at it, but I don't think they need the sun. Their seeds grow under the ground away from the sunlight. So the sun, so the sun came after one day after plants. I mean, that's either way, it seems like there's an easy explanation for it, but I tend to just hold to the fact that he used his own light. Let there be light, and the sun
there is an
came out
easy
another day.
explanation, and it's that there's two different accounts, because I mean, without the sun, the earth would reach I mean, absolute zero, which nothing could survive even for one day. And
Well, his light
it
sustained it.
it doesn't say anything about God sustaining them with his light. That is the first account.
Well, it said, "Let there be light," and then later on it says, "Let there be two great lights in the firmament of heaven." So there's your sun. Afterwards, he sustained it with his light. But one day is still not a problem. I don't see how, because their seeds grow under the ground away from the sunlight, and then the sun came after one day after plants. Boom. Either way, I think it can be explained scientifically or theologically, supernaturally, with the fact that because he's going to sustain the new heaven and the new earth with his light. Why wouldn't he do it in Genesis on the first and second day of creation? I mean, that seems like a pretty theologically easy answer, or a scientifically easy answer.
But what he did is he separated the light from the darkness. It doesn't say anything about a sun or anything like that. It just says light. And plants need a lot more than light to grow. It's very much has to do with the sun and the distance from the earth, and the amount of radiation that they're getting, and it's everything necessary.
What about Revelation? Okay, what about Revelation and the new heaven and the new earth? He's sustaining it with his light. Are you saying God? I mean, if you don't want to believe the Bible and you look, because I know a lot of people even say, "Oh, Genesis 1 and 2, two separate creation counts," and it's just like the so-called contradictions they come up with. It's hilarious because you actually look for an answer, seek an answer, find an answer. Like, well, that was easily explained. Like, I find if you explain
Revelation isn't about the end times. Revelation is the rantings of John of Patmos, talking about how Rome was going to be overthrown. It was basically his one last screw you guys, basically trying to scare them. That's all that it was him just trying to prophesy the end of Rome, and it didn't happen.
Well, I think if you read Revelation carefully,
I'm so sorry, you guys. I've just had to. I know that you have an answer standing for truth. I'm really sorry, but just to try to squeeze these super chats in really quick.
Yeah, no problem.
So Farouk Assad said it would have been cold since there was no sun at all, namely before the. So. Thanks for that super chat, Farouk Assad. And if you want to respond,
it's not really a good point, because he's sustaining it with his life, just like in the new heaven and the new earth. There's no sun, there's no moon. He's sustaining it with his light. He's God. He can easily do that.
Come on, have some humor. Sun, the sun, Father, Son.
Oh, what did he say?
Okay. I don't know if they.
You pulling a fast one? Okay, go on to the next one.
I think they meant cosmic sun, but that's all right. Sigifredo Sarabia, thanks for your super chat as well. They asked, how many push-ups for a fish to leave a fishbowl? Thank you for that super chat. We appreciate that. Good to see you here, Sigifredo. And last, DB Cisco asks, what makes your ancient creation story better than all the other ancient and modern creation stories? Thanks for that super chat, DB.
Well, I think the fact, because everything we see in reality, everything we see in empirical evidence-wise, I mean, points us to Genesis. That's why you see everything in regards to, Y chromosome Adam, mitochondrial Eve, the fact that, we observe low genetic diversity. All of these things have to be explained away by the evolutionists with certain rescue devices, right? Like a population bottleneck, for example, to explain it's all storytelling. And you know what? Modern genetics has actually discovered Adam and Eve, Noah's flood, the Tower of Babel. It's written in the human genome. You can either accept it or just be a science denialist and go to your confirmation bias, go to your rescue devices. Your other religious books, they can't make these types of retrodictions. They can't make these types of predictions. Even the first sentence of the Bible, Genesis 1, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, that indicates that God created the universe outside of time, matter, and space. The first law of thermodynamics states that, you know, matter can neither be created nor destroyed. They used to believe in the steady state theory, universe was eternal. Bible's been right all along. It says God stretched out the heaven and the earth. We know space is expanding. I mean, everything we know about science confirms Genesis. Show me another religious book that you could say that about.
According to the Enuma Elish, it's over 10,000 years older than the earliest book in the Old Testament, and it actually says that that Marduk is the supreme god. So does that mean that's what it is?
Are you saying that religious? Are you saying that religious book was written before Genesis, before the Bible?
Yeah, absolutely. It's written in cuneiform. It's pounded into clay.
I think it's pretty obvious that all the legends you see, Babylonian, all these different religious books, they all come from a common source, and that common source is the Bible. All these other legends you see.
No. That is the common source.
No. I'm right on that one.
Give me one
No,
second.
you
So sorry.
definitely are not.
RIGHT.
Forgive me 1 second. We've okay, just last two. These are late, and then we're gonna wrap up for sure, and really quickly because standing for truth. I appreciate you being so patient. Jim has died. Jim, we hope you come back. Basically, Movie Theory said, you heard it right, folks, evolution is racist. I hope you don't mind if Movie Theory, if I combine your super chats. They said, is Aaron Ra afraid to come to a neutral platform where his atheist friends can't help him by jumping in a debate? Thanks for your super chats, Movie Theory. Let's see, I guess the first one on racism would be addressed to Jim. Jim's back, he's alive. I don't know, but Jim kind of agreed with that. I don't know if you want to say anything, Jim, you can.
What was the question again?
He said, you heard it right, folks, evolution is racist.
No, I wasn't saying that. What I guess I should rephrase it. I'm saying that people have taken that title and they have used it for racist things, much like people have taken like Norse mythology and used it for racism or nationalism, something like that. You know, it's taking advantage of something and using its authority to your advantage.
Gotcha. Thanks so much, and we appreciate that super chat, Movie Theory. And then the last one, I don't know if this would be for standing for truth.
What was it about the R and Ra not wanting to come on a nonpartisan platform?
That's what they had asked.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious to anybody that, you know, modern day debate, James, what you're putting forth here is neutral, it's nonpartisan, it's fair, you're great at communicating. I mean, you send several emails, few days, week in advance, confirming the format, confirming the structure, making sure both participants are happy and content. The R and Ra, I think a lot of these atheists that like to maybe go on non sequitur and it's kind of a free for all, maybe they are hesitant to come onto a nonpartisan platform like yours, but I would certainly welcome them, and I think they would enjoy it. So if R and Ra wants to debate here, I think that would be fun. And I said it before, let's get her going. So thanks, James.
You got it. Let's see. This is like really quick. We just had 3 super chats. Okay, please. I'm so sorry, everybody. Like, if anybody wants to host an after show, by the way, I will plug it. I will put the link.
Yes, please. Somebody please host.
Okay, so whether you're an atheist, Christian, doesn't matter to us. If you want to host an after show, that's fine with us, and we will put the link in the description and announce it on the channel. So let me know if anybody does want to do that, because that might be a chance where I can even send you the questions, because I just want to respect standing for truth, because like I do know, you know, he's got a family, so it's kind of like I feel terrible like keeping him. Really quick, if you're okay with me just reading these really quick. Brian Stevens said evolution could be wrong and God doesn't have to exist. If you want to give like a 25-second response to that, standing, if you're okay with that.
Sorry, brother. Can you repeat that real quick, James?
Brian Stevens said evolution can be wrong and God doesn't have to exist.
Well, I love when people say that, like, oh, hey, you know, you're arguing against evolution and, you know, that doesn't prove creation. It's like, well, what's the alternative, for example? And the thing is, if evolution isn't true, but yet everything we see, say everything that I presented in the beginning, as in regards to the, you know, 3 major mitochondrial DNA haplogroups, We're even making direct, 8 minutes didn't give me a whole lot of time to present everything, but we're even making direct predictions on absolute mitochondrial DNA differences, and it's actually consistent with a 6,000 year time scale. And evolutionists have over predicted the amount of DNA differences by a lot, by a landslide, and they're going to have to make testable predictions now to explain that away. And young Earth creation scientists have made successful predictions and retrodictions. So yeah, evolution's true. Okay, let's pretend or let's say evolution's not true. Let's pretend it's not true. Now let's look to the Bible. We're still going to come up with these accurate retrodictions and predictions. So either way, creation wins.
Oh, I must have misspoke or something. People are chewing me up in the chat. I'm not sure what I said. But no, but the Enuma Elish is older than the Bible, and the Babylonian religion is definitely older than the Canaanite religion is older than the Israelite religion. That's where the Israelites came from. They didn't come from Egypt. They came from Canaan.
Gotcha.
Well, no, I would say that that's just a baseless assertion. If you actually read all the religious texts, you can see that they're embellished, and you can see that they all clearly come from a common source. For example, all the hundreds and hundreds of flood legends you get around different civilizations.
Hold on, 1 second. Okay, so sorry. Let's I just want to keep on moving. Please forgive me. I know that you. One really quick. I'm sorry, standing for truth. Dragnocht Silvas he'd offered to do an after show, just so everybody knows. His channel will do an after show. I'm about to link his channel in the description for this video, and then if anybody else wants to do an after show today or tomorrow, just let me know. I'm really seriously sorry we didn't get to questions. We even had somebody email a question like an hour before the debate was scheduled to start, and so I'm sorry, but just to respect Standing for Truth, like his time, we were going to send the questions to Dragnocht, so if he wants to go through some of the questions, he can do that. Like, I'm seriously sorry about that, friends. Like,
if you want to send them to me, I mean, if that's okay with him, I'll go over them or whatever.
That's totally okay with me. I will send the questions to Jim and Dragnocht in case either of them wants to go through any of the questions. Like, I'm seriously sorry, guys. I didn't plan for it to be like that. Let's see. Really quick, I think we had one more. Two more. DB Cisco said, I agree, Genesis is nothing but stories. I guess that's for Standing. If you want to respond to that, Standing, you can, as long as it's like 25 seconds if you're okay with it. Sorry for keeping you over your time.
No, yeah, you could just go through the super chats. I know they paid money to do so go ahead, read through them.
Dragnocht Silvas says, explain the falsification criteria for creationism. I think that's for Standing. If you want to respond, you can. If you want to leave, I totally understand, because you already have stayed past your promised time, and I know that you did. I think I'm under the impression you promised your family that you spent time with them.
Dragnocht can go out and actually test the model for himself. He can go measure the mutation rate in the Khoisan peoples. You know, the click speakers of I think it's Southern Africa or whatever, they haven't been measured. And Dr. Nathaniel Jensen, he's made predictions on it based on the measured mutation rate that he used to calculate the absolute differences in mitochondrial DNA and in species. And then evolutionists so far, they've made inaccurate retrodictions, predictions. They've over predicted the mitochondrial DNA differences. They've under predicted the nuclear DNA differences. We've actually it fits perfectly in a biblical based model. Fits a 6,000 year time scale. The mitochondrial map that I showed earlier in my opening
25 seconds.
Go look at that. Test on that. Yeah, no, I'm just saying he can easily go test them and falsify. He can even go in the lab and test for DNA function. I mean, I could go on and on about that, but thanks, James.
Thank you for staying later than promised. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Seriously sorry about not getting to all the questions.